Remember, in order to get continuing education's credits, you must complete and hand in a verification form at the registration desk by the time you depart today. You can also access PowerPoints and any handouts for the session via the website or the Groupio app. And we are also asking that upon completion of the presentation that you give us feedback on the Groupio app. If you are an ASHA member watching via webcast, CEUs are not available through Penn State or at Patton. As an attendance of the webcast, you may print a copy of your attendance certificate and submit that verification to ASHA certification directly for your contact maintenance hours. If you are in the audience, please submit the bubble sheet per the conference directions prior to leaving the conference today. So I am pleased to present Peter Gerhardt. He is the Executive Director of the EPIC School in Paramus, New Jersey. Dr. Gerhardt has more than 35 years of experience utilizing the principles of applied behavior analysis and support of adolescents and adults with autism spectrum disorders in educational, employment, residential, and community-based settings. He is the author or co-author on a number of articles and chapters on the needs of adolescents and adults with ASD and has presented nationally and internationally on this topic. Dr. Gerhardt serves as co-chairman of the Scientific Council for the Organization for Autism Research and is on numerous professional advisory boards, including the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. He received his doctorate from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey's Graduate School of Education. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Gerhardt.
Hello. Try again. Hello. Thank you. First of all, I'm thrilled to be here. I love this conference. I think it's actually the best conference in the country because they bring in really smart people, exception me. And then they give them enough time to talk, and then they do it again so people can actually attend. So I just want to thank the conference organizers for actually asking me to be here. Second thing, now that you know I own a sport coat, I'm taking it off. Sport coats are functionally just really like purses for men. They're places for us to put stuff. That's about it. So let me get rid of that. I've been working with adolescents and adults with autism spectrum disorders for 38 years now. Makes me a little bit of an outlier in the field. Not that I've been in the field for this long, but the fact that I've been working with adolescents and adults. Most people who get into the field work with little kids. Little kids are cute, little kids are fun, little kids show rapid rates of skill acquisition. Adults are kind of challenging, they're a little more complex. If they hit you, it hurts. There wasn't a whole lot of interest in it. I sometimes joke that I have an entire career based upon the fact that nobody else ever wanted my jobs. But the fact is, adulthood is supposed to be the best time of your life. It's supposed to be the most interesting, the most challenging, the most fun, the most risky, the most glamorous, the most depressing, the most engaging, and we've paid the least amount of attention to it. So what I want to talk about today is how I think, from a school perspective, we can change some of that so that the adult service system is better prepared, well, that individuals entering the adult service system are better prepared for what is there, and that they can end up having included lives of competence and quality. So that's the whole focus of today's talk. I will point out the bottom clip art there, the cross is there only because I stole the clip art off of Google Images. There's no religious significance to my talk whatsoever, trust me. That's all. A couple quick disclaimers, unpaid affiliations. I'm with the Organization for Autism Research, which was noted before. I also do some support for ACE, Autism Curriculum Encyclopedia, and I do some stuff for this group called Juvo, but none of those have any impact on this talk at all. I just prefer everything to be out there, and then I can just move on. A couple quick presentation notes. The first one being, I really try not to use the terms high functioning and low functioning for the simple reason that I think they are inaccurate. They're also a tad insulting, quite honestly, but I think all they really describe is whether or not, or the extent to which someone has vocal verbal behavior, if they can talk. And if someone can talk, we tend to say they're high functioning. If they don't talk, we tend to say they're low functioning, independent of their actual functioning level. So I think it's very misleading. So I tend to instead say high verbal, low verbal. Generally it means, I guess, the same in some ways, but I think it's at least more accurate. So you know that if I say that, that's what I'm referring to. The second point about language in this talk is that I am making a real effort to stop using the word functional, as in functional skills, functional curriculum, functional. The reason being is that it describes a skill and not its use. So doing the laundry is a functional skill, great. But I want to teach it so that he uses the skill. So more and more now we're talking about applied skills. And applied skills actually are a much broader category because it includes academics, because I know a lot of individuals who have some reading skills but then don't use them in the circumstances under which reading would benefit them, because they haven't learned to apply the skills outside of the instructional context. So when I talk today, I may mention at times functional skills, but I'm really trying to avoid it, but it's really applied skills, so just so you know. Portions of this presentation were developed in conjunction with Angela Rodriguez, MA, BCBA. Angela is the clinical coordinator for the EPIC School. Been working with Angela for the past 3 years, and she really, I tend to have the ideas, and she tends to figure out how to implement them. So I have to give her significant credit for her contributions to this talk. At the EPIC School, this is kind of our mission. That the mission of the EPIC School is to graduate students through individualized evidence-based intervention who graduate and are employed a minimum of 20 hours a week. Now, these are kids who are low verbal, kids with classic autism, behaviorally challenged kids. The kids who get referred almost always have some significant behavior challenges. So these are kids who present a challenge to most systems. But we want them to graduate employed a minimum of 20 hours and not employable. Why? Because the adult service system can more likely help support them if they're already employed than if they are actually responsible for helping them develop the job. So in that way, we're trying to sort of ease the burden on the adult system and bring individuals to the place where they're supposed to be. Belong to a social community outside his or her home. Historically, we tend to focus on social skills, not their use of the social skills. So we want to look at being a member of multiple communities outside your home, whether it's a community of faith, a recreational community, your community at work. We want to focus on how are you included in that community. Contribute on a regular basis to family functioning. So they mow the lawn, or they do the dishes, or they make their bed, or they do their laundry. Anything like that that contributes to family functioning. They have a functional and effective communication system. That makes sense. Are independent in basic self-care skills. This is a critical part of this mission because people tend not to recognize that many self-care skills are also safety skills. If I can teach you to independently shower, then no paid staff ever has to be in the bathroom with you again when you're showering. If I can teach you to independently toilet, no paid staff. If I can teach you to independently get yourself up to an alarm clock, no paid staff. And the fact of the matter is 99.9% of paid staff in the adult world are great. But I always have to, when we talk about safety skills, we need to focus on that 0.1% or less. So that's what safety skills are geared for. So all of these skills also fall into the area of safety skills. Can manage their own behavior across multiple environments. And then lastly, have a reasonable medical transition plan. This was the last component that we've added recently, because most adults with autism spectrum disorders graduate into the adult medical system and still see their pediatrician, which is not good use of pediatricians' resources, is not good adult health care. In addition, many access primary health care through emergency rooms, which again is not good primary health care, and it's poor use of emergency room resources. So we need to come up with a way to transition individuals into adult health care so they get the health care that they need. That's pretty ambitious, right? That's pretty ambitious. But the problem is, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do this. I think this is overwhelming. But I think the time is way past for us to set easy goals. I think we now need to set big goals, we need to set challenging goals, and we need to set complex goals. Whether or not we see that direct path to accomplishing that goal, we still need to set that goal. If you think in sports, nobody starts out winning in the Olympics. They work hard and they win the first step, and then they win in the next meet, and the next meet, and they build and build and build, and they make mistakes along the way. I think this is sort of the Olympics of life. So is how do we figure out how to do this to give these individuals these adult lives of competence, dignity, and quality? So then why this workshop if I don't really know what I'm going to tell you to do? Because this is how most professionals understand transition. It's like you hit 21, good luck, right if you get work, thank you very much. You move on to the next stage. That's not transition, and by the way, transition is supposed to occur throughout your lives. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm 58. I've had so many transitions in the past 5 years alone. But if you're on the spectrum, we tend to give you this one sort of transition, and that's about it. And that transition, unfortunately, really doesn't prepare people for life outside the classroom. Why? Well, I think partially because behavior analysts, while we may be very well trained in effective intervention to increase skills, effective intervention to decrease challenging behavior, we're not really good at deciding what skill to target. So I go to a lot of programs and I see these very clinically sophisticated instructional programs teaching skills that just will have no impact on the student's life later on down the road. So we're using our science oftentimes in a way that doesn't have any long-term benefit. The second part of this is that special educators also don't really understand how this needs to connect throughout the person's lifetime. That transition doesn't start at 16. Transition really does start at preschool. When you start looking at what are these early skills upon which I need to build, so we need to have this connected curriculum across this lifespan if we are going to actually transition individuals into these full lives. Because our post-21 outcomes are not all that impressive. Ann Rue analyzed the National Longitudinal Transition Survey Part 2 data. National Longitudinal Transition Survey is a massive federally funded research project looking at outcomes of individuals with different disability labels, something like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years out from high school graduation. She looked at the autism data and basically concluded that young adults with autism have a difficult time following high school for almost any outcome you choose: working, continuing school, living independently, socializing and participating in the community, and staying healthy and safe. So what are we doing? We accept individuals into our schools. Preschool 3, they graduate at 21, that's 18 years. What have we done at 18 years if these are our outcomes? We need to have better outcomes. We need to have bigger outcomes. We need to have more lasting outcomes than we currently have. And it's attributed to Einstein. I'm not quite sure that's right, but he said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And that is sort of where we are today. Further complicating this challenge is that our post-21, our adult research base is sort of limited. Paul Shattuck, who's a colleague of Ann Rue, did a literature review looking at all the research on evidence-based practice, on support services with individuals who are 18 years or older, published between 2000 and 2010. So it looked at a decade of research, individuals 18 years and older. Paul Shattuck and colleagues basically concluded that the evidence base for services for adults with ASD is underdeveloped and can be considered a field of inquiry that's relatively uninformed. Just when your life is supposed to get more exciting, more interesting, more fun, more challenging, more risky, we end up in a world which we know very little about. And it really is important that we start to change that if we're going to provide individuals with true adult lives. Before I get to that, I want to go through some aspects of behavior analysis that I think are potentially misapplied when we're talking about transition into adulthood and some early aspects of programming. These are some mythologies that I know people have held on to quite a while, but preference assessments are not generally necessary, as I know what is reinforcing and what is not for a specific individual. I constantly find myself in a position having to remind people that just because someone likes it doesn't mean it's a reinforcer. I like watching reruns of The Big Bang Theory. I will not work to watch reruns of The Big Bang Theory. They are two completely different things, and reinforcers change over time. So preference assessments are essential. The environment in which I work is always capable of supporting appropriate behavior. I think we have this tendency that because we set up the environment, that the environment is the best environment possible, when that may not be the case. Case in point, one of my students 3 years ago who was going through a relatively difficult time, we found that if we put Bob Marley on in the background, he was far less likely to have an aggression. Why? Well, maybe he just liked Bob Marley. Maybe the rhythm of reggae actually helped calm him down. Maybe the music actually blocked out unpleasantness. I don't know. But a change in the environment resulted in a change in behavior, which was in the appropriate direction that we wanted, so it was a positive. I run into this all the time. If my student or client looks at me when displaying a specific challenging behavior, then the behavior is maintained by attention. It's probably more an artifact of the fact that we spent the past 18 years teaching him to make eye contact. So now when he actually has something to tell you, he's looking at you, so that doesn't mean it's attention. But we interpret it that way and then get stuck there. Interventions based upon the principles of applied behaviors are only effective when implemented in highly controlled environments. I'll go into that a lot, but it really has become a bit of a myth here. There's research documenting that verbal prompts are harder to fade than other prompts. Now, I know as a behavior analyst, we hate verbal prompts. I get it. I think the problem with verbal prompts, this is my opinion, is that I think they are so low effort on our part that they get abused. For example, I knew as a kid that I really didn't have to come home until I heard my mother yell, "Peter Frederick Gerhardt, get home now." If I just heard Peter, if I heard Peter Gerhardt, if I heard Peter Gerhardt, I could blow it off. I shaped up her angry response to the final point where I knew I had to respond. And I see that at times where it's like, "John, come here. John, come here." John, because we forget that if we present the prompt once, then we should actually prompt in a different way afterwards. So we end up repeating because it's easy for us. I think that becomes the problem. Why this is important? Because the world outside your classrooms functions on verbal prompts. And I don't want people out there to gestually prompt or physically prompt my students or my adults. And if you don't believe me, next time at the grocery store and someone is blocking the aisle with their cart, gesturally prompt them to move and see what happens. You're probably not going to get the response you want. Physically prompt them to move and see what happens. Right? You'll probably get law enforcement response. But verbally prompt them to move and you'll get the response you want. There's a clear and accepted definition of precursor behavior in ABA. We always talk about, well, he displayed precursors. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean that this behavior occurred 90% of the time before the target behavior, that it occurred 70%, that it occurred 30%? What does that really mean? But it's become kind of an accepted term in our field. And prompts always need to be faded for a person to be considered independent. 2 years ago, I spoke at the Nevada State ABA conference. And at one point during the day, I found myself, as a 58-year-old man, I find myself having to use the bathroom more often than I ever have in my life. That's a little bit more about me than you probably need to know. But I'm during one session, and I need to use the bathroom, so I got up and I left the area. And I walked out, and there was a sign with an arrow that pointed men's room this way. So I followed the sign, got to a corner, another arrow this way, followed it, found the men's room. Great. If I was an adult on the spectrum, somebody would write, "Peter requires 2 written prompts in order to find the bathroom independently." One of the best skills I have is my ability to locate the prompts I need in the environment. So prompts are always there. It's whether or not we choose to use them, and they are important. That's an important skill to be able to access the prompts in the community. Probably just the last thing that I want to say is the only evidence-based intervention in ASD out there, we don't have to work cooperatively with other disciplines. Those of us who work in behavior analysis, we have a reputation of not playing well with others. We have a reputation of being a little arrogant. We have a reputation of being a little superior. When the fact is, one of the strengths I have at this point in my career is that I know what I don't know. And so last year, we brought in 3 days a week a speech and language pathologist into our program. We know verbal behavior. I've read Skinner's Verbal Behavior 3 times now. I probably understand now 70% of it. But I've yet to find anywhere in verbal behavior where he says iPad or proloquo or how to do an assessment for augmentative system. So there's this body of research that these individuals have that I need. If we look at fine motor and gross motor, I think Ogden Lindsay's little 6+6, big 6+6 really are just OT goals done in a precision teaching model. So we're looking at fluency, rate plus accuracy. So maybe I could partner with somebody there. I don't want to do sensory diets. I don't want to look at sensory integration. But there again is a body of knowledge that I don't have that I really think I should be able to access. So we get caught in these loops. And just because we do things, we think this is the way to do it. So I encourage you to continually sort of question why you do what you do. Like, is there really a research base behind this? So let's get on with some of the basics. First, the goal of effective ABA intervention, ASD, is the acquisition of skills necessary to live and work in the community with proper supports, period. That's all. And what those supports are going to be for different people really depends, right? I have this thing called an iPhone in my pocket. That is the source of much of my supports. I got to sit here and do email. It rings when I'm supposed to actually go somewhere. It tells me where I'm supposed to go. If I have a meeting, if I have a phone call. That's just a picture schedule that's in electronic form. So I don't independently remember all of that. I rely on a system to support me. So that's got to be the goal. Second, and this is important, is nobody should ever have to earn the right to be provided community-based intervention. Nobody has to earn the right to be in the community. Never. And I often hear, oh, he's too aggressive, he's too self-injurious, he's too this, he's too that. Like we can't go out in the community. I will tell you right now that I cannot teach someone not to be aggressive, not to be self-injurious, not to be whatever in the community unless I go in the community. It is impossible. But I have to be smart about it. I can look at all my data and say, you know what? Mornings tend to be better than afternoons in terms of aggression. When we start going out in the community, let's go out in the morning. And I know he works better with these 2 staff, so when we go out in the morning, let's send him out with these 2 staff. And you know what he really likes? He likes Dairy Queen. So the first time we go out, we're going to find out what time Dairy Queen opens in the morning, and we're going to go to Dairy Queen with his 2 favorite staff so I can start to build the community as a positive. What also is a challenge is I think, and again, this is my opinion, this is not the results of a research study, anecdotally, when we do community-based instruction that's relevant to the person's life, whether it's work, accessing Dairy Queen or whatever, they are less likely to be aggressive, self-injurious, or whatever type of challenge than when they're in the classroom. Why? I think because under the conditions in the community, it's more interesting, it's more fun, they're doing something more relevant to their life. In the classroom, quite honestly, even if we've changed goals, we're teaching them in the same way, in the same room, with the same other kids. Like, after a while, that has to get kind of tiring. So the more we can look at how do we change this up, the better we're going to be. Now, that doesn't mean like we're error-free in the community. Absolutely not. But my goal has to continually be, how do I get him to succeed outside the classroom? And I can't do that unless I take that step. None of this is easy. Okay? Now, I have 3 hours that to talk to. I said this morning, too. We have 3 hours. I can go through this whole talk, I can make it sound kind of interesting and funny, and I can kind of flip, but it's hard. If it wasn't hard, you guys wouldn't be here. Everything I do has been 2 steps up, 1 step back. But the beautiful thing about behavior analysis is none of it anymore is about me. It's about whether or not I'm benefiting my students. You know, Skinner said the rat is always right. Keller said the student's always right. I don't get to decide if I'm right or wrong. My student tells me if I'm right or wrong. So it's my ego is like long ago falling out of this equation, and all I want to do is what's right for my student. So while it's hard and I make mistakes, I keep moving forward because I have this ethical obligation to provide these services that will result in a competent adult life. My single most important epiphany over the past 38 years, that I am a behavior analyst who happens to work with individuals with autism, while at the same time I'm an autism professional who happens to be a behavior analyst, and I'm an educator who works to understand autism and behavior analysis, and a community advocate for my students and clients, and This is important because if you work with little kids, you get to be the specialist. You get to be the BCBA. You get to be the special education teacher. You get to be the OT-PT. You get to be the SLP. You get to be the specialist little kids. You work with older individuals, you really don't get to be the specialist anymore if you're going to do this right. At this point in my career, I have a pretty good working knowledge of ABA, positive behavior support, government services and resources, mental health concerns, medication side effects, sexuality, menstrual care. I know more about menstrual care than any adult male should. Job developments, job coaching, community-based instruction, generalized systems of communication, staff training, community training, and that's just a start. I don't get to just fall back and say I only work in this narrow area because life isn't this narrow area. And we're not even going to touch on 90% of the aspects of life in this talk today. We're really only going to touch on some very narrow aspects of it. But if you think that you're going to get to stay in this tiny little professional bubble, like, it doesn't work that way if you're going to work with older individuals. Add to that, I'm a community advocate because if we all agree it takes a village to raise a child, then you know what? It'll take that village plus 2 small towns, a mid-sized city, a chapter of the Hells Angels, 3 communes, an international coalition, an on-call medical team, 7 lawyers, 4 government officials, a fleet of vehicles, and of course some alcohol to raise a child with ASD. Okay? Because the needs are that great. So if you think you can do this on your own, you really are sadly mistaken. Okay, Mother Teresa said, you can do what I cannot do, I can do what you cannot do. Together we can do great things. It's as a team that we can actually move forward in supporting individuals to adult lives. Now, if as a behavior analyst you want a really good definition of transition to adulthood that remains true to your behavior analytic ethics and roots, then what we have to do is go to the 7 dimensions, okay? And you all know the 7 dimensions, or most of you do. Applied deals with problems of social importance. Behavioral deals with measurable behavior or reports that can be validated. Analytic requires an objective demonstration. Procedures cause the effect. Technological are described well enough that they can be implemented by anyone with training and resources. Conceptual systems derives from a specific identifiable theoretical base. Effective produces strong socially important effects. And generality, designed from the outset to operate in new environments and continue after formal treatment. Well, that then leads us to, of the 7 dimensions, I think the most challenging and also the most relevant transition are these. That we deal with problems of social importance, that we produce strong socially important effects, and that our interventions are designed from the outset to operate in new environments. So if you want your transition definition, the effective transition from early intensive behavioral intervention to adulthood requires behavior analysts to address problems of social importance in ways that produce strong socially important effects by using interventions designed from the outset to operate in new environments and continue after formal treatment has ended. That's our job, right? That's our job. And for the behavior analysts who are here today, the BCBAs who are here today, I just want you to think, like, there are only 7 dimensions of behavior analysis in the article. And if we're not attending to these 3, we're missing about half of them. Okay? Like, we only have 7 things we're really supposed to do. So we need to make sure that we include these 3 when we do this. Autism education and intervention in and of itself, yes, addresses the problem of social importance, but whether you address it well or not is the real measure of social importance. As I said, none of this is easy. Okay, this is all really hard work, but it's such important work. Before we go on, I think there are a few more details about ABS intervention that I really want to discuss. The first one, I'm going to be very brief about this, is this difference between evidence-based intervention and evidence-based practice. Evidence-based intervention describes a technique, whether it's a differential reinforcement, a token economy, non-contingent reinforcement, non-exclusionary timeout. That's an evidence-based intervention. Evidence-based practice, however, is your ability to decide what to use under what conditions with what student or adult to obtain this particular desired result. And I will tell you that until I was practicing for about 15 or 20 years, I was not good at evidence-based practice. I was really good at evidence-based intervention. I could tell you what interventions were, what the research said, but it was only after many years of experience that I became good in understanding how to make this treatment selection based upon all the values of the person and combined with the goals of the individual and the context in which we're doing it. And I think that that is something that we sometimes lose sight of, that our practice of applied behavior analysis is as important as the components of applied behavior analysis. I'm going to skip over the next couple of slides here, but just to say, to practice in an evidence-based manner requires knowledge, time, effort, error, and practice. Even then it can be elusive. It says, studies show it takes 10,000 hours of practice to be great at anything. I would think a willingness to practice anything for over 10,000 hours is a mental disorder, and that makes me feel better about my mediocrity. You're welcome. We can't afford to be mediocre. Like, I tell my staff on a regular basis that they are their students' last best hope for this individual to have a real life. To this individual, you are as important as a cardiac surgeon who's getting ready to do a heart transplant for that patient that needs one. Because without us, it's not going to happen. So we have to take it that seriously and with that level of determination that we can actually produce the results that are necessary. Please note that evidence-based practice in ABA does not require the development of a set of rigid, unyielding, and unalterable instructions governing interactions. In fact, evidence-based practice in ABA and ASD requires us to modify interventions in response to a slew of conditions. I think this means that evidence-based practice is really kind of Zen-like, okay? And what I mean by that, we do a lot of community-based instruction. We have a lot of individuals who present with some challenging behavior. So you're at the grocery store, let's say, and you have an adolescent student, and he shows signs of agitation, and you know that signs of agitation may lead to aggression. You may think, well, there's nobody at the grocery store right now. I have a really good relationship with him. I know what his reinforcer. I think I could probably work through this, and that's what the protocol says anyway. So we're going to try and work through this, And you may increase his schedule of reinforcement to help get him through a rough patch. You may do a lot of things, but you sort of follow the established protocol, and that may be right under those conditions. Same scenario now, but there are more people there. And you realize that I don't have the best relationship with this person. I have a good one, but I'm not really his favorite person. And oh, damn, I left some of his reinforcers back in the van. I don't have that. You may say, you know what, we're going to pick up one more thing, and then we're going to go to the checkout, and we're going to check out because we want to end on a positive, and that may be the right decision then. Third condition, exact same setup, but now it's Friday, and it's the Friday where Social Security Administration has deposited the Social Security checks into everybody's account for all the seniors, and everybody in the supermarket except you is over the age of 65. And it's packed. You may think, you know what? I'm going to drop the basket and we're going to leave right now because I want to cut my losses and live to fight another day. And that may be the right decision under those conditions. That's what evidence-based practice is that ability to make those decisions in a competent way while recognizing the contingencies that exist on a day-to-day. Does that make sense? That's where we need to be. And if you don't believe me, ask Gina Green, who said, when done correctly, there's not a field of intervention that's more person-centered than applied behavior analysis. I need to know my students. They're not subjects. They're kids. They're adolescents. They're adults. They're people. I need to know what they want out of life. I need to know where they're going. I need to know what their hopes and dreams are. And that's really hard when you have a bunch of low-verbal individuals who can't tell you. So I have to try and figure out from their behavior where they want to go. But I don't know another way of doing this effectively. A second variable that we often miss is this idea of context. Context is king in what we do. You know your three-term contingency, antecedent behavior, consequence? Well, surrounding that whole thing is context, right? We can't take it out of context. It's almost like the fourth term. Problem is that if we look at intervention environments, well, our most complex, least realistic is the research protocol. Then we may go to an ABA clinic, and then an ABA classroom, and then the person's home, and then the community. Each one, at each step, we increase the level of variability and the level of challenges. But where do we ultimately want to end up? In the community. And if we only stay within the research protocol of the clinic, we never get there. So we need to start looking at ways to make this transition much easier than we currently can. We have, unfortunately, gotten really reinforced for intervention in very highly controlled environments. Because it's great, we can control all the variables. You know, we should be successful in our clinics. We should be successful in our classrooms. Because we control all the variables. I say when intervention starts, what type of intervention it is, what the targets are, how long intervention goes on, what the reinforcers are, what's the reinforcement schedule, who they work with. Like, I control every variable. I should be successful. We should no longer brag about being successful in our classrooms and clinics. Because you know the real measure of success is how well this kid does outside of our classroom and clinics. Isn't that dimension number 7? Like, that's got to be our measure of success, okay? Within ABA itself, Applied Behavior Analysis itself, I do think autism is kind of an outlier here. These are just the special interest groups out of ABAI, and if we go through them all, like autism, of course, but behavior analysts for the arts, like you do that in a highly controlled environment. Behavior analysis of military and veterans issues, highly controlled, no. Almost no other topic do we rely on this highly controlled environment because we understand the importance of context and where the behavior is supposed to be displayed. So in many ways, we're sort of the outlier here. And this is just one of my favorite quotes on the subject. Behavior analysts often emphasize the need to study the effects of ABA procedures in the context of typical practice settings. So we want to do this. We say we really should be studying this in normal practice settings. However, reviews indicate that large majority of our research focuses on interventions delivered by study personnel, usually in tightly controlled environments such as laboratories, specialized ABA classrooms, or distraction-free areas set up to provide one-on-one instruction. This discrepancy may reflect the dilemma that behavior analysts have had trouble resolving. We recognize that conducting studies in practice settings may require sacrificing some scientific rigor because the primary mission of such studies is to deliver services rather than conduct research. Yet we regard the quality of many studies in these studies as unacceptable because you didn't control for all the variables. And that's a problem. But I need that information. I need those data if I am to do my job well. These, by the way, are just the references from that quote. And then when I started back in the field back in 1980 at the Douglas Developmental Disability Center, this was one of the things we were taught. It was kind of drilled into our head. If generalization is a concern, then teacher the behavior is most likely to be displayed. And this was in response to, at the time, people were trying to teach kids how to ride the school bus by building a fake cardboard school bus in their classroom and then practicing riding in the school bus. Think that worked? No, I still go places and I see the fake school store. That's not even a real school store with fake prices on it so that the Zagnut bar is $5. So it relates to nothing in the community to teach, and it doesn't generalize to the community because it has no relationship at all to the community. If you want kids to ride a bus, if you want kids to purchase stuff, you got to go to the store and you got to go on a bus. It is that simple. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. It's one of my favorite topics, though, to talk about because I think positive reinforcement is our most effective, least well understood, and most poorly implemented intervention. The reason being is that it is far more complex than people realize. Everybody knows positive reinforcement, okay? But at least 3 or 4 times a year, I have to go to my staff and talk about the difference between positive reinforcement and a bribe. Because as people, we fall into the bribe headset. Oh, remember, if you do this, you'll get this. That's a bribe then. That is not a reinforcer. I was at a program where they used to describe it, it's a promise reinforcer. Like, I don't care what you call it, it's still a bribe. And it is not reinforcement, and it's not what we're supposed to be doing. But positive reinforcement is difficult anyway, because evolutionarily, I think we are programmed to recognize the aberrant and ignore the normative. So we are not programmed to reinforce for good behavior, but we're programmed to consequent for challenging behavior, okay? Obviously, if a stimulus is positive reinforcement, not as a matter of function on the behavior, not its structure. Like I said, I like Big Bang Theory, but I'm not going to work for it. So that is not a positive reinforcer. Plus, the value of the reinforcement value of any stimulus varies with an individual at different times of the day. Okay, a slice of pizza may at one point be a positive reinforcer, but if you've had 6 slices of pizza, probably that 7th is not going to be a positive reinforcer. So it changes. I talk about music as a positive. I see this. He likes music. He's on a music break. He likes music, a positive reinforcer. I love music. I used to be a musician. But you know what? I like certain songs when I'm in certain moods, and I want to hear the whole song, and I don't want you to turn it off when the damn timer goes off, because I really enjoy this song. So don't stop me in the middle of this. Yet that's what we do all the time. And now we say, well, I don't know why. He used to love music. It's like because he's heard that song 500 times. And we make this assumption that because this kid's on the spectrum, that's the only song he's going to like. And we keep playing it over and over and over and over. And then we say, well, he watches the same scene in Frozen all the time. I say, yeah, but that's his choice. Like, that's a different thing. That's a different behavior than me presenting him with the same stimulus over and over again. So we have to understand how and why this really works. The response effort required to perform the desired response may be incompatible with the value of the reinforcer provided. Competing differential schedules of reinforcement will often result in the learner in the leaner schedule being perceived as a punisher. So if I'm working with this individual and we're doing some basic discrete trial stuff, and I have a 1-to-1 reinforcer ratio, so I'm like, John, touch blue, good touching blue, boom, here you go. John, touch red, good touching blue, boom, here you go. Now we go to setting a table, now we go to a task analysis, where the reinforcer is only going to come after he actually exerts fairly significant effort compared to when I'm doing this. Like, that shift may be perceived by the learner as an aversive. And then we say, oh, he hates table setting. It's like, no, he doesn't hate table setting. He hates the fact that you don't reinforce him as well when he's setting tables as opposed to when he's actually engaging in this other task. Does that make sense? If you don't know Michael Perrone's research, you should really check out Michael Perrone's research. Also, we are really not good at multitasking. We like to think we are, but research indicates that we can only really do like 2, maybe 3 things at the same time. So if we're taking data, like setting up for the next trial, reinforcing him, trying to get like it's hard for us to do. So neurologically, we have our own limitations here. And then also, we forget sometimes that positive reinforcement is a source of a lot of challenging behavior. Positive contingencies can be dangerous, specifically because they do not generate avoidance, escape, or their emotional counterpoints, even when the contingencies are ultimately detrimental. Positive reinforcement is implicated in eating junk food instead of a balanced meal, watching television instead of exercising, buying instead of saving, playing instead of working, and working instead of spending time with one's family. Positive reinforcement underlies our propensity towards heart disease, cancer, and other diseases that are related to more maladaptive lifestyles than to purely physiological or anatomical weaknesses. So this is a really complex topic that we sort of just give very short shrift to in our practice. And we say, no, this is his reinforcement schedule without really thinking it through. Now, I'm often asked, can you use primary reinforcers with older individuals? Can you use food reinforcers? And the answer is yes, but by the way, for example, preschool kids, like you can do, like here's the Swedish fish. You can hand it to them. You still don't pop it into their mouth, but you hand it to them. Middle school, it may be more of a token contingency, so you have to earn something. This is probably the best thing I ever bought for the Epic School. It is a snack machine with a clear pane in the front. It is a built-in preference assessment. So individuals earn their nickels, then they get a quarter, then they go down to the vending machine, and they get to pick what they want. And what's fascinating is kids pick different things. They don't pick the same thing every time. And what we're also finding is, that student who really has very slow rate of skill acquisition and letter identification or number identification, teach them to use this vending machine and they'll pick it up like that. Because the only way you can get your Swedish fish is if you can know what E9 is. So now all of a sudden, the MO for actually knowing E9 is pretty high. And then we can change stuff around the machine, so it's not always E9, so now you have to know another combination. You have to be able to match. It is a built-in instructional tool. But what's fascinating me is none of my students, I have 32 students, none of my students, when we first got this and we have a drink machine, there's no soda, but it's a drink machine, none of my students knew how to use a vending machine. That I thought that would be a really simple skill. None of them. They didn't know where to put the money, they didn't know how to press the buttons, they didn't know how to make a choice, because they were never allowed to. Everything was bought for them. If they're out with their parents and there was a vending machine, they wanted something, the parents would buy it for them, as opposed to teaching them to do it. So a lot of these simple things in life really are important when we're talking about the transition to adulthood. And you know what? You guys use positive reinforcement. You guys use primary reinforcers in your own life. You guys use food. You just don't think of it that way because you say, if I stick to my diet all week, then I can have ice cream or chili cheese fries or a cheeseburger or wine or like it's a much longer contingency and it's different primary, but it's still the same thing. It's just in how you do it. So if you're delivering positive reinforcement to adolescents and adults, some do's and don'ts. Do incorporate choice and subtly record choices for a more naturalistic preference assessment. Focus more on engagement and less on stigmatizing behavior. Growing up in the field, this idea of stigmatizing behavior was always seen as a reason to develop a behavior intervention. It was harmful to self or others, limiting access to the community, or stigmatizing. With all due respect to everybody I've ever worked with, no matter where they are on the spectrum, I don't think I've ever met a person on the spectrum who felt stigmatized by their challenging behavior. I don't think they ever, my student who is rocking at the grocery store, talking to himself, scripting, engaging in, I don't think he ever thought, shit, I better stop this. They're looking at me. This is really stigmatizing. I think what he thought is, why aren't you people doing this? It's Walmart, for God's sakes. Why aren't you people doing but you know who's stigmatized? We are. We're the ones saying, put your hands down, stand quietly, do this. We're the ones. Now, I'm not saying I want him to do that, but I am saying that doesn't keep him out of Walmart because I need to teach him to shop. And if I teach him to shop and he knows that shop is a cool thing, then I can actually work on reducing the behavior. And does that make sense? Where historically we've done it backwards, I think. So we've waited till we had a certain level of no behavior before we could go out in the community, which is a problem. Increased response effort equals increased power of positive reinforcement. The individual can get their own reinforcer, identify environmental conditions that may act as SDs, as indicators that reinforcement is available. When I worked in New York City, which is the greatest place in the world to work with kids and adults on the spectrum, because you have so many resources available in 4 square blocks, it was much easier to teach street crossing than it is in suburban New Jersey. Now you would think it would be harder in New York City. There's more traffic, it's angrier traffic, it comes but first of all, there are stoplights and there are walk, don't walk signs everywhere. There are other people who walk at the same time, so you now have prompt built in. Plus I can start by teaching walking across the, that I can teach safe street walking. That's a whole different skill. Safe crossing the street by starting across the street from the Dunkin' Donuts Baskin Robbins. So once you cross the street, you walk into the Dunkin' Donuts, buy yourself a reinforcer, and now all of a sudden this skill that otherwise stands in the bed is now worthwhile. And then I can move 2 blocks away from it, then 3 blocks away, and I can start building up that way. So train community members to deliver behavior-specific praise and teach self-management, self-reinforcement. Do not hand-deliver the reinforcer, whatever it is. Do not do that. If you want to hand somebody a bag of chips, that's different, because that's what you would do with a colleague at a lunch table. Oh, here's your chips. But you wouldn't give them 1 potato chip. Do not, unless absolutely necessary, use a token board. I think token boards are more stigmatizing, quite honestly, than any behavior that my students or adults might display. Do not, unless absolutely, use a timer. If a timer is necessary, use a smartphone. It's much more normative. Don't use that stupid high-pitched praise voice. Don't do good job. That's why I always worked with adolescent adults, because I can't do that. Good job. Oh, good job. I can't do that. That's just, but I can do. Great job, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That is really cool, man. Thank you. That I can do. So that's my reinforcing voice. Do not, unless absolutely necessary, use physical contact as a reinforcer. We have a policy that around the age of 6, we need to start fading physical contact as a reinforcer. Okay, it's hard. It's hard. And we may in some cases continue because we haven't identified another reinforcer as powerful. But even under those conditions, we will identify a person who can deliver that reinforcer. We do not want that student to think that any adult who walks into the classroom can tickle them, can hug them, can rub their head. We want to make sure that those discriminations are very, very clear at that point. Do not, unless absolutely necessary, use positive reinforcement that's age inappropriate. For example, watching Barney. One of my adults who graduated 2 years ago works independently on the campus of a major university. His favorite thing to do with his downtime is watching Thomas the Tank Engine. He works independently on a college campus, We tried for many years to get him to watch something else, to find something. At the end of the day, you know what his favorite thing is? Thomas the Tank Engine. So we had to say, you know what? When you're on your break from work, if you want to watch it with your headphones on your iPod, like, you can do that. Don't watch it on the big screen. Don't watch it without your headphones. But we decided it's kind of like his version of porn. Like, as long as you do it in private, like it's socially acceptable, you know? But we couldn't find anything else. And I think if we're talking about the transition to adulthood, this is an area that we've neglected, is how do we shift kids from these very childish reinforcers into more age-appropriate reinforcers as they start to age up. And it needs to be done systematically. It doesn't just happen. Like, it needs to be taught. And we can teach reinforcers. We do it all the time. But we need to continue moving forward. My fantasy study, like, if I ever win, you know, the Mega Millions lottery and I get that $274 million, like, I'm going to put a couple million to do an early intervention study, and I'm going to have 2 matched groups of kids with autism, 10 kids in each group, matched on IQ, a bunch of other levels, you know, so they're going to do really good, like, early intensive behavior intervention. But Group A is going to get Thomas the Tank and Barney and Play School and all that, and Frozen and all that other nonsense as reinforcers. These kids, on the other hand, are going to watch Led Zeppelin videos, and they're going to watch hentai and Cowboy Bebop and, like, anime, not hentai, and all this other kind of stuff. And I guarantee that when they're 15, this group is more socially included than this group. Because I think we tend to almost imprint those things on kids when they're very little, and then don't bother to try and change them later on. And that's a big problem. Do not establish demands that place a distance between the behavior and the stimulus and the positive reinforcer. What I mean by that is we did an assessment of a lot of our token systems and found out that they weren't really token systems, they were just kind of clocks. So the student knew that when this board was full that they got something, but the tokens themselves had no value whatsoever. So they acted as a timer. And also, quite honestly, if they had reinforcing value, it was a negative reinforcer that they showed when you don't have to work anymore. So, you know, we kind of got rid of those. We got rid of most of them. But also the fact that we would say, okay, great job. Give yourself a token, and then you get reinforced. Like it puts another step between the desired behavior and the reinforcer, which is what we don't want to do. And then don't stop thinking about how to do this better, because it really is complex. Just some of the explanations I will not accept. I tried reinforcement, but it didn't work. I hear this on a regular basis. Then you didn't try reinforcement. By definition, reinforcement changes behavior. It's that simple. Nothing reinforces this student. Rick Cabina and I did a study when we were at the Vista School in Pennsylvania in Harrisburg. Basically 3 kids who all the teachers said nothing reinforces them. We found a whole bunch of stuff that actually should act as a reinforcer. But you know why teachers thought they weren't reinforcing? Because they didn't have that, and the students didn't have that anticipatory response. They didn't smile when they got the reinforcer. They didn't sort of look forward to, skill acquisition was going up very nicely. But in effect, teachers weren't reinforced for providing the reinforcer, so they felt it was, so it became this sort of circular logic that kept it going. She knows she's not supposed to do that. This is my favorite. Parents of typical kids say this all the time. She knows she's not supposed to do that, or he knows he's not supposed to do that, right? You know what? I know I'm not supposed to speed. I have a GPS that lights up when I speed. There's a written prompt every 3 miles on the road to tell me not to speed. Yet I continue to speed. Why? Because at the time I get reinforced for engaging in that behavior when the reinforcement here on going to speed limit probably isn't worth it. So it has nothing to do with knowing what you're supposed to do. It has to do with the contingencies that are in place at that moment, okay? Given all that, the effective use of functionally relevant and socially valid schedules of reinforcement in the community remains a major challenge and a programmatic necessity if behavior analysis to meet our obligation to our students, clients, and families. And this, they give you a lot of treats while they're training you, so play dumb for as long as you can. Okay, this is not necessarily theoretical. When I went to Rutgers undergraduate, every undergraduate had to take freshman composition because obviously, like, nobody graduating high school knew how to write. But we were told that we were based on improvement. So our first essay that we handed in, like, it was like written like if I'm left-handed, I wrote with my right hand in crayon, holding it upside down, so that by the end of the semester I can demonstrate improvement, even though I ended up only where I began. Okay, so I think every one of the students that I work with have their own BCBA. They're adept at changing the behavior of my staff. They know when to smile, they know when to laugh, they know when to push, they are amazing. But we sometimes as behavior analysts don't think that the rules apply to us. And we forget that impact that it can have. And of course, lastly, the way positive reinforcement is carried out is far more important than the amount. So, and I think we sometimes forget that. The issue of generality, seventh dimension, designed to continue after intervention has ended and in different environments. Okay, Don Baer, no less than Don Baer. Learning one aspect of anything never means you know the rest of it. Doing something skillfully now never means you'll always be able to do it well. Resisting one temptation consistently never means that you now have character, strength, or discipline. Thus, it's not the learner who is dull, learning, disabled, or immature, because all learners are alike in this regard. No one learns a generalized lesson unless a generalized lesson is taught. We have to be taught to generalize. This is a typical person thing. This is a person thing. This is a learning thing. This is not an autism thing. What is sad, however, though, is that if we look at Stokes and Baer 1979 ways to categorize generalization, we have train and hope, sequential modifications, introduce to natural maintaining contingencies, train sufficient exemplars, use indiscriminable contingencies, program common stimuli, mediate generalization, and then train to generalize. But I was getting kind of tired at this point. In their 1977 analysis of generalized procedures in the research, they found that 90% of the publications reported that train and hope was actually the method that they used. Okay, a study done in 2016 basically concluded the same thing. And this analysis, train and hope, or train to criteria and hope technique, was used in 43% of the studies. What's even more interesting is that only 9 of the 32 studies focused on teaching functional living skills. That focused on teaching functional living skills were taught in a natural environment. So they taught them how to do a laundry like out of context. And then they would expect it to generalize, which really doesn't happen. So, simple thing about skill mastery, because we make a lot of mistakes here. Skill mastery is the mastery of a particular skill. Is generally understood to have occurred when the individual in question consistently and accurately displays the skills under the right conditions. In ABA and ASD, we tend to define mastery as occurring when the target behavior has occurred 90% accuracy across 3 staff, 3 consecutive days, 4 state holidays, 9 bank days, like we have all these criteria, okay? Some things should be 100%, absolutely. Street crossing, general safety skills, bowel and urine continence, menstrual care, dressing before leaving home, flying an airplane, juggling chainsaws. There's a bunch of things that need to be at 100%. But I'll also point out that I lived in New York City for a couple of years, and my girlfriend actually started to take data on the number of times that she had to pull me back from stepping into the street when a car was coming. Because if we were walking late at night, or I just wasn't attending. I was inside my head, and I was so my street crossing data are actually only at about 75%, I think. Okay, but I relied on someone else to help me. That was how I always looked at it. So, some skills, though, also require rate to actually be considered mastered. Data entry is a very popular skill for potential employment. There are a lot of jobs in data entry today, but you know what the mastery criteria for data entry? It is 11,600 keystrokes per hour at 99.9% mastered accuracy. It is not 90% accuracy. It is not 90% accuracy for 500 pieces of information. It is 11,600 keystrokes at 9. If you do 90% accuracy for data entry, that means 1 out of every 10 checks your bank processes is wrong. So unless we actually understand the context in which the skill is supposed to be displayed, we're not going to come up with the right contingency, with the right mastery criteria. For some skills, mastery is a function of ability to access or accept embedded prompts. If you've ever done Lego or IKEA furniture, it's the same sort of thing. Other skills can be 80% correct, most academic skills, most social skills, a variety of leisure skills. If you can hit a curveball 1 out of 3 times, you can make $18 million a year. You don't need to be at 90% accuracy for hitting a curveball. That's pretty simple. But then we also, when we look at these ADLs, and I really don't like that term too, Activities of daily living, because all it really means is chores. That's what it is. And by calling them activities of daily living, we sort of elevate them. We make them sound more impressive. Chores are great. We all have to do chores. There's nothing wrong with chores. But don't call them activities of daily living, because my activities of daily living are much more fun than that. Like, those are not, like they're just chores. But when we are doing our task analysis for these, we need to do them in the simplest, fastest way designed to come to the desired outcome. I have at the bottom here, very simple for laundry: retrieve laundry basket, sort laundry by color, put one load in the machine, measure detergent, softener, start washing machine. All right. I would do it, retrieve laundry basket. I haven't sorted clothes in 20 years. Well, no, that's a lie. I do sort clothes, but I sort them by like function. Like I put like all the shirts in one load and like all the pants in another, like, I don't know why, I just do. Like I was taught like sorting by function a long time ago, and it sort of stayed in my repertoire. Okay, so, but there's no real reason to. I'm not buying like really expensive cotton shirts where they're gonna bleed. I'm not buying silk. I don't have any leather that I'm gonna throw in. Like I'm not worried about it. So put it all in, put one load in the machine. Like put a Tide Pod in. Tide Pods are great as long as you don't eat them. Just don't do that, and then start washing machine. Like, do it the simplest way possible. Like, do not get, oh no, this is the way they have to do it. They have to do every step. No, they don't. Figure the easiest, fastest way to achieve this end goal. Technology is changing how we do everything. And the goal of technology is to make our lives easier. Tide Pods are a bit of technology. Just because it's not electronic doesn't mean it's not technology. So all of these little things, like, can add up, but we have to be able to access them. You know, and you do in your own life, right? I just bought a new car, but before that I had an older Toyota, but I still had that car key that I could like hit the button and the door would open. But then like a year and a half ago, that battery died. Do you know how difficult a task it is to actually put the key in the door of a car to unlock it? You know, that is arduous. Like that is, I used to dread having to do that. Plus, that was socially stigmatizing. I felt, oh, poor guy, he can't even have a car where he has a button to open the thing. I'm like, you know, so I finally broke down and had to buy a battery for it. Like, because once we get used to, but we tend to write these task analyses that are the longest, most difficult way ever, as opposed to the simplest way. Another really quick example. If you want to teach grocery shopping in a really easy, fast way, first step in your task analysis should not be to write a task analysis. It should be to go to the grocery store with your student, give them the hand cart, and say, go, go. And I guarantee he or she will stop and look at you and go like, aren't you, your job is to come with me. Aren't you supposed to like, you know, just let them go. Don't, you know, stay a couple feet behind, but don't go. Every individual I've ever worked with, you know what they can find in every grocery store in the world? Snack aisle or the candy aisle. 100% accuracy across multiple opportunities. Right? You know what that tells me? That's the most important place in the grocery store for this kid. So that's where I'm going to start my task analysis. And initially I'm going to say, go to that area, buy one thing. As soon as you pick it up, put it in your cart, we're going to go pay for it. As soon as you pay for it, you get to eat it. Why? Because I want to place the reinforcer as close to the actual behavior as possible. I don't want to then go to the van and then have to go all the way back to the school, and then you have to, like no, that completely defeats the purpose. You can eat it right away. That's the thing. Just like everybody else does, like you guys do with the Doritos, and you put them in the front seat of the car, and then you open them up on your way home. It's the exact same thing. So, after you do that a couple times, then you start your shopping list and say, okay, you know what I want you to do is before you go to the candy aisle, go get a gallon of milk. So now you're backwards chaining steps into the shopping list, but you're still ending with this choice of your preferred thing that you get to eat on the way home. And now all of a sudden shopping is a preferred activity, as opposed to how we usually teach it. We go with 4 kids, and we go with 3 staff, and then we go for 10 items, and we spend the whole time going like 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we got 4 kids. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we still have 4 kids. 1, 2. Where's Johnny? Where's John? Oh, he's there. Okay, fine. 1, 2. And nothing ever gets taught. Make it worth his while. It's like, well, he might buy the big bag. Good, let him buy the big bag. He's not going to eat the big bag, but you can save the rest of it for later. Like, we put so many limitations on this, it's just ridiculous. And then There also are, for some skills, there's even a gender component to normative mastery. This is not mine, this is like men shower, like we wash our hair, our armpits, and our crotch. Water takes care of the rest. Women wash every body part like they're going into surgery. Okay? My task analyses tend to be written by whom? Women. So I have male students with showering task analyses that have them washing between their toes. Do you think he's ever going to master that? No. You know what the goal of showering is? That you look clean and you don't smell. Like, meet those goals. That's all. If you can do that, then you can move on, because we spend far too much time trying to achieve this mythical 100% mastery for these complex. Sometimes in life, you know what the outcome is? Good enough. It's good enough. Let's move on. We've hit good enough. A really quick example of that, we had one student who, toothbrushing, which is one of my least favorite things in the world to try and teach. I think it's incredibly difficult, was about 60, 70% accurate for a relatively long period of time. But it was all random errors. It wasn't even like consistent. He kept missing the left upper quadrant. One time he'd get the left upper quadrant, but missed the like. So it was all. So we talked to a dentist, and he said, "Well, if it's all random errors, just have him brush his teeth 5 times a day, and it'll cover all his teeth, and you can go on." And I said, "Fine, done, mastered." Like, that's all I needed, as opposed to spending the next 8 years trying to teach him to get. Does that make sense? You know, So there is no one mastery criteria appropriate for all skills across environments all the time. Defining skill mastery, like everything else we do, is really highly individualized. For transition, though, we do have this sort of set or concept and then set of critical skills, the most impactful intervention targets. Basic challenge is that this is the universe of skills, need to be a successful 5-year-old. Typical 5-year-olds are just amazing little beings. Typical kids are really astounding. Like, they really do. They freak me out, you know. I'm not good with typical little kids. Like I said, kids who can talk, like, I'm not good at. Like, I'm much better with kids who are nonverbal. But it's kind of easy to be a competent 5-year-old. It's not all that hard. This is your universe of skills, though. You guys are so amazingly competent. You don't even know how many skills you have. And what's amazing is there are more skills that you don't have than that you do have. And every single one of you here has skills that I don't have, and I have skills that you don't have. And it is a vast universe of possibilities, what we can do. You want an example of how talented you actually are in terms of your skill set? You ever drive down the highway for a while and then all of a sudden realize you have no freaking idea where you are? You've been driving for 20 minutes. You don't know if your exit is coming up, if you passed your exit, but you've been driving safe the whole time. That's a skill set. So how do we figure out of that whole universe of skills what we're going to target in our IEPs, for which we have only 6 hours a day for 42 weeks a year, to teach all of these skills to mastery in a way that actually generalizes and maintains to the world outside our classrooms? Well, we have a working definition, but it's just a work in progress. There's nothing all that significant about it. Once a critical skill is once acquired, a critical skill is one that, once acquired, enables the individual to independently complete a variety of relevant tasks and engage in desired activities. In this way, we consider it to be something like a behavioral cusp. So it actually sort of generates the opportunity to engage in more skills. But this also is, I like this part of the definition because it would include reading. Like, if you can read to a fluent level, you can use that for a lot of different things. Like, you don't have to, so it doesn't just like focus on quote unquote life skills. And is used with sufficient frequency to remain in the individual's repertoire. The exception here are safety skills, which ideally are low response frequency skills. My least favorite skill to see in an IEP for an older individual is, when is your birthday? Why is that one of my least favorite skills? First of all, if he hasn't learned it by now, why do you think that you're going to be the one who can do this? Second of all, it is one of those skills that if the person is asking you, they don't know, so you can lie. You could say anything. You could say Tuesday. And they have to go, "Oh, okay, happy birthday." Like, and that's it. You know, and how many times are you ever asked that? Like, next to zero. But I see it in IEPs all the time because we think it's important. And then lastly, it can be acquired within a reasonable time frame. Okay? I want everybody to be able to like choose different shoes and put on different shoes. You can put on boots and lace up your boots and put on ice. Like, I want that. But if you're now in your 7th year of shoe tying, I think I'm going to give it up. I'm going to give up the ghost and say, you know what, Converse slip-ons look really cool. So let's move on to that, and then we can see where we're going. So all of these come into, and now these are data from the Epic School in my first year, where we looked at, if we looked at this set of skills that we thought were critical, which was toileting, both urine and bowel, dressing, eating, chores, working in a dyad, self-management, community-based instruction, and safety skills. 3 years ago, we really weren't in great shape. You know, I haven't fully prepared all the data, so I wish I had the comparison, but we're doing much, much better now. But if you look school-wide, out of 32 kids, only 50% were independent in toileting and urine. If you look school-wide, only 28% were independent in toileting bowel. 53% were independent in dressing, 53% in eating. 44% did at least one chore, 16% could work in a dyad, 28% had self-management, 75% had CBI, but that's because of that's us doing it. That has nothing to do with them. And then only 25% had safety skill, had a safety skill in their repertoire. That's not impressive, right? That's not what we're supposed to be doing. They all had IEPs, they had signed IEPs that everybody approved. But none of the skills in the IEPs were really critically important. And this is a problem in behavior analysis, that we emphasize, we put such an emphasis on our clinical competence, our clinical purity. But I do want to point out that teaching the wrong skills well is really no better than teaching the right skills poorly. So you can have the most clinically beautiful intervention to teach a particular skill, but if this skill is not important, all you've done is waste time. And I do think that that is the one sin we commit in our field when we actually talk about transitioning, is that we waste time. We actually teach skills that don't matter. Okay, we provide interventions that are less than effective. Like, that's the biggest sin. I just have one more section and then we'll take a break. Critical skills, Pat McGreevy has the essential 8, which are making requests, waiting after making requests, accepting removals, making transitions, completing 10 consecutive brief previously acquired tasks, accepting no, following directions, completing daily living skills, and tolerating situations related to health and safety. If you know the essentials for living, these come from the essentials living. It's a great assessment. It's very complex, but it really is a great assessment. I forgot what I was going to say there, but it was really important, but it'll come back to me. Oh, I know. With the medical, like working with our school nurse, we just recently started a blood draw instructional program, but to do it, we contracted with an actual phlebotomist. So she's coming out to actually desensitize our kids to the initial process, to like having the rubber thing around your arm and then what the needle looks like and all this stuff. Nobody's getting blood drawn yet. Well, one kid actually did. But we built it up in a very systematic way so that when they do need that, they're able to actually have it done. So we're predicting where problems may arise and a needed skill, and we're addressing it that way. If you haven't read this lately, I know you've read it, but please go back and read it. Okay, Montrose Wolf's Social Validity, the case for subjective measurement or how behavior analysis is finding its heart. This is how you determine what really important goals are. Not going to read the whole quote there, but he said, they would then ask, how do you know what skills to teach? You talk about appropriate skills this and appropriate skills that. How do you know what you're teaching is really appropriate? Oop. The suggestion seemed to be that society would need to validate our work on 3 levels. The social significance of the goals, are the specific behavior goals really what society wants? The social appropriateness of the procedures, do the ends justify the means? And the social importance of the effects, are consumers satisfied with the results? We have come to refer to these judgments as judgments of social validity. And then he closes with, it's clear that the number of the most important concepts in our culture is subjective, perhaps even the most important. Martin Luther, as the story goes, was severely criticized for setting Protestant hymns to popular melodies of songs and dance of the time. So he wrote hymns, but then set them to music that was popular. And he got a lot of criticism for it because it's like the devil's music. To which he replied, well, why should we let the devil have all the best tunes? Okay, because if he's looking at social validity and wants his songs to be adopted, then that's a way to do it. So it's really simple. why should we let others have all the best human goals and social problems? Now, we do have what we call our 20 questions, which are all on social validity. We are currently doing an analysis of this. We have to do an item analysis and a couple of, so I don't have the data yet to say if you get 18 out of 20, this is a good goal or whatever. But these are like, is the skill derived from an assessment? Is the skill one that can be used across multiple environments? Is the skill one that will be useful in 3 to 5 years? Okay, once acquired, is the skill one the student will use with sufficient frequency? How many people here, I'm just really curious, how many people here teach like high fives to kids or have taught high fives to kids? Yeah, most of us do, right? Yeah, no problem. I mean, just so you know, ask a typical like 7-year-old or 10-year-old or 12 if they high five. Like, the vast majority say, "Are you out of your mind?" Like, and then say, "Oh, you must fist bump," and they go, "No." Like, so a lot of sort of the social interaction skills we teach kids are already out of the repertoire of typical kids. Like, it's almost to the point that I think, like, when DSM-6 comes out, like, high-fiving is going to be a diagnostic criteria, I think, because they're going to be the only kids who actually engage in that behavior. Doesn't improve their ability to communicate, doesn't improve adaptive behavior. And then, is the skill one that has relevance to future employment? Is it culturally relevant? And is the one that has relevance to future life in the community? So we ask ourselves these questions. Like, and does this skill meet any of these? Does it answer yes to any of these? Because we're not really good at just picking skills. And so absent a good understanding of social validity, behavior analysis will almost always be at a loss when prioritizing skills targeted for acquisition as part of the transition process, except hopefully for the next 10. Why don't we take a break, 15 minutes? Right, 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll get into some of these things. Thank you. All right, let's get going. I do have an awful lot of stuff. I've done 94 slides out of 216 so far. So I'm probably going to skip over some stuff, but the handouts which are being posted online, like you can get the handouts. If anybody wants more information, just email me. You can just go to the Epic School website. You can get in touch with me that way, and I can send you out whatever you want. So in May, Angela Rodriguez and I did a full-day workshop at ABAI on adulthood begins in preschool, and as part of that, we put a lot of thought into thinking like about our 10 critical life skills, what they were, and what that meant to sort of address in preschool. Also, the definition of some of these skills, and I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, but we actually then broke it down to, if this is the goal, what does that mean? We have to look at like early intervention, preschool, elementary, middle, transition, and adulthood. For the slides that you'll see, we really only have elementary, middle, and then into adulthood, but we broke it down sort of that finely. But these are the top skills. Critical skill toileting, bowel and urine. Now, this is what I mean by the definition, that the goal is independent use of bathroom when necessary, including locking the door, wiping seat, wiping self if necessary, washing hands, exiting bathroom, and returning to the location. It is not with supervision. It is completely independent. It's leaving one place, going to another, doing this, locking the door, which is not a skill that's often taught. More and more as we're going out into the community, to make that distinction, to teach that distinction about that there's urine on the seat and I have to wipe the seat. It's a really fine distinction and it's very hard to teach. So we're just teaching all the kids to actually wipe the seat all the time. So that we do that, and then wash your hands, exit bathroom, and return to location. So the skill is a much bigger skill than just you would typically see for toileting. Does that make sense? But that's the applied aspect of it. That's why it's written that way. So you can see we have preschool, elementary, the components we would want to look at, and then all the way up to transition, which would be choose gender-appropriate restroom, which actually can get a little interesting in autism since there's some research looking at that there seems to be a larger percentage of individuals on the spectrum, particularly those who are high verbal, who can self-report, who are trans, bi, or gay, particularly lesbian, than their typical peers. What we don't know is, are they just more accurately and honestly reporting? Because typical people may sort of, those questions, they may sort of fudge on some of those questions, so we may not be getting it completely accurate. So we don't know if it's actually higher or not, just that it reports higher. So issues related to those are going to come into play when we look at this. Critical skill dressing. closing door for privacy, independent selection of appropriate clothes, donning clothes in correct order and orientation, and checking appearance before opening door and exiting area. Please understand that the important goal here is independence. We often run into challenges sometimes with families who may get very fussy about what they wear on a particular day. And I think that's important because how we look is important. It defines how people perceive us. But I want to look at independence first, and then I can worry about clothes matching second. Because the independence part, if I keep interrupting independence to worry about that he put on a red shirt and yellow pants, that's not going to help me get to where I go. Does that make sense? Also, particularly Angela has developed a whole protocol about how to fold clothes and put them in the drawer so that all he really has to do is go to here, pull the shirt on, and pull it this way. And then so we've set up the environment to promote as independent as possible. And again, we can then break this down. Critical skill, independent eating. This is one of those ones that we've learned only from working with adults, because if I want to get you socially included at work and there's a break time or a lunchtime, I cannot get you socially included if you put 14 French fries in your mouth at once. If you steal food from somebody else, if you wipe ketchup on your shirt, I can't do it. This is one of those big social barriers that typical people have. So able to eat correctly using all appropriate utensils, knife, fork, spoon, to eat a variety of foods neatly and at a culturally accepted pace. Again, now this goes into a whole broad category. Critical skill bathing, self-care, to demonstrate the ability to independently bathe, shower, and complete relevant self-care, hygiene skills, and toothbrushing. At last year's gala, because if you're a private school with autism, I think you're legally obligated to have a gala every year. So we have a gala to raise some money. But one of the things that we did there is we have a fund the cause, and last year's fund the cause was to install a teaching shower in our school. Because we want to be able to start teaching earlier than we ever have before. And the primary reason is I've been in this field for a long time, working with adolescents and adults for a long time, and I will tell you, I have seen more naked men in the shower than Elton John and George Michael's put together. And I'm tired of it. I am just tired of it. And do you know how difficult it is to teach that skill then, as opposed to if it was taught early on? And I get that typical 6-year-olds don't shower. But I also don't want to teach them a skill that they're not going to use later. So maybe we should start with showering and then build from there and go forward. All of these things now are coming into play as we make these decisions. Critical skill, household participation, independent completion of a variety of household chores, or in our field, ADLs, like I said. The issue is not whether to target these skills, but rather when to target these skills. And my best example, this chart I got off the internet, so you know it's true, because everything on the internet is true. But this is what typical kids can do around the house at different ages. So from 2 to 4, they can do a lot, but they help. They help, and they love helping. Little typical kids love helping mommy or daddy do stuff, 4 to 7, they're still doing a lot of helping, but they can actually do some independent stuff. They can put their own toys away, so there's little things that they can do. 8 to 10, they really start to do things independently. They can make their bed, they can set and clear table, they can dust, vacuum, help wash car, help wash dishes, take out the trash. By the time typical kids are 12, they can do everything around the house. I'm not saying they do it, but I'm saying they can do it. And it's in our field usually say, well, he's 12, so in the IEP, we really should look at some of these ADLs now, which in effect means he's 12 years behind his typical peers. Where if we started looking at these, and forgive me for saying this, from a developmental perspective, we would have much greater success when he's 12 or 13 in actually him being independent in these than waiting to teach it at that point. Critical skill, ability to learn in a group, to acquire new skills when presented via dyad or triad instruction at a rate of acquisition similar to that documented via one-to-one instruction. This is going to be a tough one because most teachers and instructors in our field have learned that a dyad consists of, I'm going to work with you while you're on your iPad. And then I'm going to take your iPad away, I'm going to work with you and give you the iPad so that you do, that's not dyad. That's one-on-one instruction with somebody taking a break. That's all that is. Like, a diet has to be active engagement, basically at all times throughout the instructional period. So this goal is more about, as much about teaching staff as it is about instructing our students. Self-management, to demonstrate the ability to identify one's own behavior as either appropriate or inappropriate and deliver potential reinforcement in the absence of supervision. Critical skill problem solving, variable responding. This is a relatively new one that we're looking at because we find that we have a cohort of individuals who have been taught, the behavior's been shaped up, that there's only one right answer to each problem. So if it's, how do you open a door with a key? Like, but then if you don't have the key, what do you do? Well, you can go get help, you can do this. Like, we stop at the how do you open a door with a key as opposed to the problem solving part. So we're doing some, what I think are some interesting stuff, like variable responding with some lag schedules, but also my favorite is if we can take a couple pieces of like 10 pieces of Lego, say build something, you know, and then after they build it, you can push it aside and then give them 10 pieces of Lego again and say, now build something, but not this. And it's only correct if it's not this. And then you can put the two things off the side and say, okay, here's 10 pieces of Lego, build something, but you can't build either of these. So at each step, it gets more difficult to be correct because you constantly have to change the answer you had from the previous answers. Physical safety, a domain that we've done relatively poorly in. We have a good body of research in terms of safety instruction. If we look at behavioral skills training, we have a huge body of research in behavioral skills training. But in order for it to be effective, we need to, like students or adults who have more language, who can understand more of a language-based intervention or cognitive-based intervention, which I currently don't have. But we are looking at some aspects of error-based instruction, which if you go into some of the safety research and teaching safety skills, they talk about error-based instruction, which is that you need to be able to make an error in order to acquire the skill. Like every single one of you here, at some point in your life, were instructed verbally not to touch the hot stove. But I guarantee every single one of you here, after receiving that instruction, still touched the hot stove. Because the verbal response doesn't equate to actually the behavioral response. Does that make sense? You still do it today, by the way, because you'll be at the restaurant and the waitress or waiter will come over and say, like, careful, this plate is hot. And what do? You touch it. It's fascinating, okay? But because you need the error in order to do it, otherwise you don't acquire that particular safety skill. So we're looking at that. Obviously, communication, demonstrate the ability to make one's own wants and needs known to naive listeners across multiple environments. I have a lot of students who communicate really effectively with my staff, but not to the person at the pizza place. And that doesn't help them. So it's got to be to the person at the pizza place. Obviously, self-advocacy skills fall into that. And then where I've spent the majority of my time for the past probably 15 years is in this thing called adaptive behavior. This is that whole subset of life skills, whether that you can see like the Vineland adaptive behavior skills or the adaptive behavior scale or any of these assessments, but it's everything you do that's not academic. Okay, this is Bill Eward's definition. Bill Eward, one of the Trinity of the White Book. That's why I use his definition here. But adaptive behavior, those skills or abilities that enable an individual to meet standards of independence that may be expected of his or her age and social group. Adaptive behavior changes according to a person's age, cultural expectations, and environmental demands. So adaptive behavior are what you do every day that really aren't academics. And it changes as a function of many, many variables. I am a comic book geek. I don't know if anybody else is a comic book geek, but back in the 70s, if you know who Robert Crumb is, he had a series of underground comics, one called Zap Comics. And in Zap Comics, he had two characters which were drug-dealing brothers called the Freak Brothers. And their motto was, drugs will get you through times of no money better than money will get you through times of no drugs. I've adapted that, so it's adaptive behavior will get you through times of no academic skills better than academic skills will get you through times of no adaptive behavior. And the fact of the matter is every single one of you here at some point in your life has faked your way through a situation about which you knew nothing. But you knew enough to sort of nod a little, to smile, and you also knew enough to get yourself out of that situation before someone asked you an actual question. right? But if you had the actual knowledge base to participate, but you didn't have the adaptive skills, you wouldn't be able to break in. So adaptive behavior is central to what we do. It's often not really researched in ASD because it's not considered a core symptom. Deficits in social skills and communication are, that's part of adaptive behavior, but it's not part of the diagnosis itself. The diagnosis of the intellectual disability does require significant, what's the word I'm looking for here? Reduction in adaptive responding. But that doesn't happen with ASD. We do know that if we look at younger kids, their adaptive behavior is somewhat closer to peers, but as they get older, that gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger, which we would expect. It gets bigger in social, it gets bigger in language, it gets bigger in a lot of different ways. Adaptive behavior competencies are not simplified curricular goals. That's why I don't use the term functional skills, because people see that simplified. Like, you know how hard it was to teach kids with autism to safely cross the streets in New York City? Like, that's harder than inferential calculus. Right, so these are not dumbed down goals, okay? But I have to teach those because in New York City, you're never more than 50 feet away from a corner. So if I want you to be safe, that has to become a priority of what we're doing. These are not just ADL skills. These involve both simple and complex decision-making skills. These are not always highly preferred skills, but then again, some may be. I've talked about this extensively in the past, so I think there are 5 parameters to effective adaptive behavior intervention. One is context. We talked about that before. Provide instruction where the skill is supposed to be displayed. It's that simple. Okay? If you want them to learn how to take a bus, you got to ride a bus. If you want them to learn to buy groceries, you got to go to the grocery store. If you want to learn if you want to learn them how to, all of a sudden now I'm in like Mississippi in 1928. If you want to teach him how to have a job, you have to have a job. It's one of the phrases that I hate in the employment literature, supported employment literature, is work readiness. Where they say, oh, he has to be work ready. He needs this skill, he needs this skill, he needs this skill. You know what work readiness means? He's breathing. That's what work readiness is. Like, and if he's breathing, I got to figure out a way to get him employed. It's that simple. And the fact of the matter is, my first job, I was a car hop at a Stewart's Drive-In in Hamilton, New Jersey. I had no coursework in being a car hop. I learned to have the job by having the job. That's how we do it. That's why it's so important to get out there and do it. So, context, critical. Intensity, how often instruction takes place. Opportunities to respond. Efficiency, we've already talked about this. What's the response effort? Transfer of control, where does stimulus control lie? How do I transition control from me to the environment? When working in New York City, teaching kids to respond to the traffic light and not to my prompt, we did it by recording about 50 different intersections and 50 different traffic lights from different angles, different distances, putting it all together, playing it up on the smartboard, and using it as the classic 1, 2, 3 red light game. So kids got reinforced if they attended to the right stimulus, and some of it was from very far away, so they had to pick out the stimulus in the middle of a whole bunch of stuff. Some was very close, so it was easy. So that was how we taught them what the relevant stimuli in the environment was, and it was the red light and the green light, or the woke don't walk. Does that make sense? Okay, that was one time where we had to take it out of context to give him sufficient examples in a very short period of time. And then value, which really is just the MO. Why might this skill be important to the student? Over the course of today, I was having a lot of discussions with people about, and I think I may have brought it up already today, but how social responding in our students, the MO is not really there. And that usually it becomes the SD for more demand. So if I interact with you socially, you're going to ask me to do more. Why would I want to do that in the first place? So it's not really an easily reinforced behavior. So we need to sort of change that contingency around so that social responding is a positive, is relatively easy, and doesn't always lead to more work. Not going to talk about context at all. Intensity, I really just want to touch base on, only because if we're teaching complex community skills, and it took a while for him to learn simple discrimination skills, we better provide the same number of opportunities to respond as we did for these simple discrimination tasks. I go to schools and I see that going to Burger King is in his IEP and that he goes once every other week. Okay, if, for example, it took him when he was younger 1,000 discrete trials to learn colors. 1,000 discrete trials is not a lot, 50 sets of 20, you can do it in a day. It will take us 40 years to give him 1,000 instructional opportunities if he goes once every other week. And our inter-trial interval is way too long, so any skill acquisition that was made is lost over the 2-week period. So, and this is not an autism thing, this is a people thing. Okay, you need to have repetitive, intense practice in order to acquire skills, especially complex skills. Talked about efficiency and transfer of control, but value is, if I could go back to the beginning of my career, the only thing I would study is motivation. Because I find it fascinating that every individual I've ever worked with, independent of how cognitively challenged they were according to their scores on tests, when they were motivated, can do some pretty amazing things. I had one student who tested out in the profound range of intellectual disability. Today it would be need of significant supports, who was able to unlock a door, climb a ladder, walk along a ledge, and then get up to the roof of the building because he wanted to dance on the roof of the building. That's pretty complex problem solving. Okay, didn't have number identification, didn't have letter identification, but was able to do that because of the motivational variables. When we look at those, so if I could figure out how to more effectively manipulate that, I'd be in a much, much better place. But I don't think we're in the classroom anymore, Todd. The basic idea is that we need to get outside of our classroom. Here's the IDEA 2004 transition definition. I'm just going to read the highlighted part. Coordinated set of activities, a results-oriented process, improving the academic and functional achievement, facilitate child's movement from school to post-school activities. This is Congress speak, and it's completely meaningless. Now, I like IDEA. I am not bashing IDEA. I am not bashing the transition requirements, but this is what Congress does. They set laws that are woefully poorly defined so that the courts will define them. That is why at the heart of IDEA, we have free, appropriate public education, and they didn't say best education. They didn't say good, they didn't say, they said appropriate, so that the courts could define what that meant. All of these terms remain open to definition through various number of court cases. But if we look at behavioral intervention with adolescents and adults, we have to look at a complex set of variables. First we have to look at staff variables. We have a staff to student ratio, staff absenteeism, staff retention, training of direct care staff, training and experience of the BCBAs, competing staff interests, and so on. Then we have student variables, learning history, communication deficits, social deficits, mental health diagnoses, physical health, medication side effects, boredom, sexuality, sleep issues, family concerns, and so on. And then we have resource variables, staff variables, student variables, physical access to the community. I go to public schools, and they literally can only get the van for 2 hours a week in order to go out in the community. That's a physical variable to doing this. Access to transportation, acceptance of risk, we'll talk about that. Administration support, systems change challenges, and so far. If you know how to do permutations, you can see how many possible combinations of challenges exist in doing this. It's no wonder it is so hard. But that's why we have a job. Because if it was easy, anybody would do this stuff. A recent meta-analysis of behavioral intervention with adolescents and adults, 2014, they looked at the research from 1992 to 2012, so a 10-year span. They found 43 articles, not great, but not bad, okay? And areas of intervention included academic skills, 4 studies, adaptive skills, that's good, 19 studies, phobias, 1 study, problem behavior, 5 studies, social skills, 8 studies, and vocational skills, 6 studies. So there's a growing body of research out there, but it's still lacking in what we really need in order to best support people into adulthood. One of the challenges that we face is that there really is this large gap between research and actual practice with behavioral interventions for adolescents and young adults with autism, okay? That is a challenge for us going forward. And part of the challenge has to do with the variability associated with context. Now, everybody knows chaining, right? We all know chaining, okay? Established intervention, a lot of data behind it, very well established intervention. This is the task analysis for zippering your jacket. Okay, 7 steps. It's a little wordy task analysis, but it's still a decent task analysis. 7 steps. Once you have mastered this skill using this task analysis, you can zip any jacket on the planet. Everyone zips the exact same way. There are no conditions under which it zips sideways. There's no conditions under which it zips bottom to, it zips the same way every single time. It is linear and unchangeable. Now the task analysis for grocery shopping in the community. Is it linear and unchangeable? It is neither, because we have 3 components. We have production skills, which are the motor skills, social skills, which are the social engagement that you have to do, and navigation, which are the physical movement throughout the environment skills that may or may not be displayed in the same order every time. And there may be barriers to different ones of these, so that we now have to figure out, because we're going to go and get Cocoa Puffs, but no, the Cocoa Puffs are gone. There are no Cocoa Puffs today, so what do we do? So the task analyses that we teach for life in the community are much more complex and much more variable, which again gets us back to these decision-making skills and variable responding. Because otherwise, we hit a brick wall when we get to the point where there's a gap in our task analysis. Does that make sense? Adolescents and young adults in community-based intervention, this is a skill set unto its own. You have to learn how to be an effective educator, an effective behavior analyst in community-based context. CBI is classified as an evidence-based intervention. It is the consistent and systematic provision of instruction in real-life settings. It's a hands-on process involving parents and other members of the community, and it tends to focus on the acquisition of adaptive skills, although the application of academic skills can be included in the process. It is, in many ways, based more on a strengths model than a deficits model. And I will tell you, at this point in my career, I am incredibly tired of talking about deficits. I am so bored about deficits. I want to know what the person can do. I need to be able to build upon his strength, particularly when I'm initially going out on CBI. One of my favorite things is I can ask people, so does he or she do anything for an hour? And often I say, oh no, not for an hour. And I say, well, how long can they watch Frozen? And they say, oh, he can watch Frozen for a day. I'm like, well, you know what? That's a performance deficit then, because in his repertoire is the ability to stay engaged in something he likes for a very long period of time. I just need to figure out how to transfer that skill into a skill that has more functional use or more applied use across different environments, okay? But before you develop your task analysis for community-based instruction, what I recommend you do is go out into the environment in which you're going to do teaching and just observe. Why? Because like I said before, you guys are amazingly competent and you don't even realize half the stuff you do. And if you just sit in your office or sit in your classroom and try and write your task analysis from memory, I guarantee you're going to get it wrong. Go out there and actually see how it's done and get a sense and look for where those decision points might be or where those error points could be so that you can incorporate them. But you need to actually go out there and see what is really going on. Then look at 4 different component skills: production skills, which are the gross and fine motor skills; social skills, which are the verbal and nonverbal skills, the use of which is expected to achieve a specific desired outcome; navigation skills and mobility; and then, of course, safety skills. Safety skills are so critically important because if I want him or her to be independent, they also need to have a certain safety skill set. I talked about that already. So let's just talk very briefly a little bit about risk. The assessment of risk, we realized, starts with understanding the definition of independence. How many parent members do we have here who also don't work as professionals in the field? How many parents do we have here? Okay, the reason I phrase it that way, by the way, is I think that line between parents and professionals is a bit blurred today. I forget who it is, but someone once said that by the time the parent of a child with autism reaches 21, that parent has read enough to have a BCBA, a law degree, a medical degree, an engineering degree. The parents today are an educated group. So to just arbitrarily say parents is an inaccurate descriptor. But we start by asking parents, what is your definition of independence? Because if I'm going back to that grocery store, My definition of independence, to say he's mastered, it's independent, is we're outside the grocery store, and he does it all without us there. That scares the hell out of a lot of parents when I say that. Because their definition may be, well, you got to stay within 5 feet of him. And I'm like, I really don't want to build myself into the task analysis. Like, I want to be able, so we sit down and say, okay, if we use my definition, what are the risks? Tell me what the risks are. What are you afraid of? Well, he might leave through the back door. Okay, that's a reasonable risk. I get that. I'll tell you what, during the first couple times that we get to that point, like, I'm going to stage a staff there, someone he or she doesn't know, just to make sure that they don't go out the back door. But before we even get to that point, he's going to have a lot of practice. He or she will have a lot of practice going past that back door. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. He or she might pull the fire alarm. That could be a real problem. So I'm going to look and see, make sure I know where the fire alarms are, and maybe the initial shopping items that he or she gets are going to be an area where there's not the fire alarm. So there isn't the visual temptation, the visual SD to actually engage in that behavior, so we can do that way. Maybe that. He might open the Doritos and eat them before he pays for them. Like 1 out of 10 shoppers at Walmart do. Like, it's a possible risk, but it's not going to stop us. Like that's okay. He might put something in his cart that's not on his shopping list. We would call that a possible reinforcer, and that's a preference assessment. So that's okay. He might not get everything on his list. I never get everything on my list. Okay, so some of those are real risks that need to be considered. Others are not real risks. And we need to figure out, and I have to emphasize, and I emphasize with all the families, I cannot reduce risk to 0 for anybody. I can't reduce it for myself. But what I can do is minimize risk for people. And I have, again, no data on this. This is just experience. But I will tell you that I firmly believe that the more socially included a person is, the safer they are. So if I go to Food Town or ShopRite or Superfresh and half of the staff there know him or her, he is so much safer than if it was an individual who they don't know at all. I had lunch with 2 parent friends of mine today, and the mother told me about going to Burger King with her son, and the manager of the Burger King came out and said, "Michael, where have you been? We were worried sick about you. Where have you been?" And it was really because Michael would go there every Wednesday, and he hadn't been for like 4 weeks. And they were like, and we didn't know who to call. We didn't know, like, we should, what? So the mother said, like, now they have all my contact information. Like, this is a group of people who were not trained, who really want to help this individual. So the more included you are in your community, and it doesn't have to be that you're talking to people and you're engaged, like, just that they know you and they interact with you and they understand who you are. Like, that's enough to actually give you more of a protective shield than anybody else. Probably 5 years ago now, if you read the Life in a Different Key book by Karen Zucker and John Donvan, it's a story, and I think it's in the last chapter, but we were doing travel training with a young man, and at one point, he was taking a bus to a Chick-fil-A restaurant, long story short, a couple blocks from where the bus stop was. He's doing very well. In the back of the bus, I was sitting in the back, he was sitting up in the front. He started to get a little upset. This was about maybe a month or 2 into intervention. And he started to get a little upset. And I was about to go up and sit down next to him and just say, "Just relax, man, it's okay, don't worry about it." We were stuck in traffic or something. But before I could do that, like 2 other young adults, typical young adults on the bus, started complaining about him, kind of loudly. They're like, "What the hell's his problem? What is he?" They use the N-word, I mean the R-word, not the N-word. They use the R-word. And I'm like, well, I got to go talk to them first because they're a bigger behavior problem than my student is. But before I could get there, somebody else on the bus yelled out, "He's got autism. What's your problem? Shut up." And I just said, "Thank you," and sat down. Because if you ride the bus every day for a couple of weeks, guess what? About 80% of the people get to know you, and you become part of that little social world. And there was no way he was ever going to get off at the wrong stop. Even if he didn't want to go to Chick-fil-A, they were going to force him off at Chick-fil-A. Like, that was not, because they had taken such an interest in him. And we really started to think more about that there is no necessary transition to the community, but there is a transition to the communities. And each one of us operates in multiple different communities within the context of our lives. Okay? This is one community here for me. There's Autism ABA community is one. I have another community within the field, which is really just the ABA community. I have another one, which is really just the autism community. I have a community of friends who are high verbal people with autism that I like to hang out with. And I use different skills in each one of those. So it's transition to the communities, but that's how we need to sort of look at this. And the more involved someone is, the lesser their risk in almost any situation. Don't want to talk about that. So we can look, we go in and we can look at the general layout of the building. We can find out, please, when you start doing community-based instruction, rule number one is always know where the bathrooms are. Do not go out with a student and then they ask for the bathroom and you have no idea where it is. So now you have to hunt for 20 minutes and try and figure out. And a skill I don't have is at the mall, trying to use that big map that tells you are here and how to get, because I have no idea how to do that. So know where they are before you go, know where food is, know what potential diet or allergy risks there are, know if they're sensitive to sound or light or all this stuff, and just be smart about it. That's all. Just be smart about it and you will be fine. Implementing CBI, I do think at some point we won't have to do CBI, which I think is going to be a real loss, because online shopping, because stores don't like their customers shopping braless and stained sweats and drinking a glass of wine, which you can do at home, right? I think, and I'm at risk because it's not the braless drinking a glass of wine thing, but I actually one time ordered 2 8-packs of Diet Coke from Amazon because I was too lazy to go out and go to the store, which I think is the ultimate laziness. I was actually embarrassed for myself, so I never did it again. But the fact of the matter, Amazon sells Diet Coke in 8-packs. Somebody's buying a lot of it, or they wouldn't be selling it. So eventually, things are all going to change. But for now, what's also important is that most CBI goals on some level are more often than not transactional. That means there's going to involve some interaction with another person. One of our small programs, we call it Learning for Leisure, which is really just a leisure sampling program where students will go out on a weekly basis and just try different leisure activities. So they've gone to the movies, they've done yoga, they've done mini golf, they've done bowling, which personally I hate bowling, but that's just from having worked with adults for so long, because bowling is the great sport of the group home, because you can put 6 adults into the van and go to the group home and it's let me give you this really heavy thing to throw, which if you do under any other circumstance is going to be a problem. And then no matter where the ball goes, we reinforce you, because it's in my entire history of doing this, I think only 2 people I worked with actually bowled. The rest thought it was just a way to get French fries. That was the whole, but that's okay. But we want to see, but when we do this, we have to train the people at the yoga studio. We have to train the people at the ceramic studio. We have to, because they don't know how to do this. So that's why we mean by it's transactional. And so the fact is, if my students have 80% of the skills, somebody else is going to pick up 20%. Now, I want them to get to 90% of the skill and somebody taking 10%, but it's not going to stop just because they only have 80%. Look at the frequency with which you need to do it. This is a little, the only time I really get into sort of mathematical calculations, but if I want you to go to a grocery store, for example, I keep going back to the grocery store, and I know that you have mastered a relatively complex task analysis that is cleaning the kitchen after lunch, which has 3 or 4 activities and takes about 25 minutes to do, and you mastered it, and it took 100 opportunities to respond. So 100 opportunities to practice skill before you mastered it. I can say it's probably going to take 100 opportunities to master grocery shopping based upon his learning history and rate of acquisition. I can then say I have 100 and I have 30 weeks in which I want to teach this. So that means across 30 weeks, I need to provide at least 3.3 opportunities a week in order to meet this 100 opportunities within 30 weeks. Now I may decide that that's too dense or not dense enough, but it gives me a way to figure out, because otherwise we literally do fall back on the once a week thing, which almost nobody learns anything. Do you think Tiger Woods practiced golf once a week? No. And you know what's fascinating about Tiger Woods? I'm off on a little tangent here. if you watch them when they report golf scores now, like whatever tournament he's in, they don't tell you who is winning, but they tell you how much Tiger Woods is losing by. Yeah, they say he's like 4 strokes off the leader, but then they never say who the leader is. Like, how impressive is that in your life? If you get to that point in your life where even though you're losing, they cite your score, like, that's got to be like the pinnacle of success. But I'm off on a tangent there. So does that make sense about the numbers and how to figure that out? Okay. We look for embedded prompts. I talked a little bit about embedded prompts before, but these are all embedded prompts, right? Fire, exit, the recycle thing on the bin, please wait to be seated, hello, my name is, restrooms this way, fire, exit. Please do not flush tampons, pads, or baby wipes down the toilet. I think, by the way, that has to be the most ineffective prompt ever. Because if it worked, they would stop putting it up. So women, take heed, okay? Like, you're not listening to the sign. That's all. I see it everywhere. So apparently it remains a big problem to do this. The hello, my name is, I am one of these people. I don't like hugging. I don't like this. So I really want a color-coded set of name tags at things because I want like my name tag to be red. So it means please don't touch me. Like I want that you can have yellow ones, which means like I shake hands, you know, like green ones can be I hug and kiss. Like, and that's like fine, but like tell me, just tell me what to do and I am a much happier person. And I also think, I don't know if I said this before. Yeah, I think, but did I say the name tag thing? Did I talk about name tags? Like at conference name tags, like these are fine like this, but yeah, the ones that pin on and then they go here. It's like, can I make a rule that like you never should have to put a name tag on your breasts? You know, especially like in the Me Too era, like, because it really is very confusing for us guys. You know, I'm like, I want to know your name, but I don't want to look at your breast, but I really want to know your name, but I can't look at your, like, it's just, so, like, please, like, hold it up high for me next time. That's all. So embedded prompts are everywhere. Again, your skill is finding the prompt. Challenging behavior during CBI. I can't teach you not to be aggressive in the community unless I go out in the community. It is that simple. So I have to go out. We now have 50 years of behavioral research focusing on assessment, intervention, and challenging behavior. However, almost all of this has been done in relatively well-controlled environments and not out in the community. And in the problematic behavior literature, community-based means school. So it tells us very little about how we're supposed to actually look at this stuff at Toys R Us, although Toys R Us doesn't exist anymore, at, you know, at the mall, at the golf course, at like whatever it is. So it's a real problem. But when it comes to display a challenge behavior in the community, the big question is, and I talked about this the hill I want to die on today? My rule is be safe, like, and live to fight another day. That's all. That's got to be the main rule. Okay, I talked about the 3 options. Some real tips and tricks for doing this stuff. Please just don't fall victim to superstitious learning. Like, we're constantly, as people, like neurotypical people, we're looking for patterns that may or may not exist. That's why we see the man on the moon, the face of the man on the moon, because we look for a pattern. It's not there, but we make a face, so on. So especially we're in community-based instruction and our awareness is a bit heightened, that the freezer door to get the corn like was really frozen over and it was hard to open. So, and then he had an aggression. So it was because the freezer door was open as opposed to like any real functional analysis. And then if something similar happens, like he tried to open the bathroom, it was locked, and you say, oh, it's because doors are locked. When it may not be that at all, but we sort of fall victim to that. If you are interested, Stuart Weiss's TED Talk on superstitious learning and our tendency to over-recognize patterns is fascinating. So it's TED Ed, type in Stuart Weiss. He's done some really great work. He does work in the field of behavior analysis. I don't think he considers himself a behavior analyst. I think he considers himself a psychologist. But he did publish a very interesting article a couple of years ago in the Behavior Analyst about why he was stopping reading Java. And one of the reasons was that he knows how to do a functional analysis and he knows how to do skill acquisition programs, and we need to start asking bigger questions. Like, we know a lot of the little answers, let's ask big questions now. So, a couple of these, like, when it comes to the cause and function of challenging behavior, superstitious learning may lead us to potentially faulty beliefs, such as, he was looking right at me when it occurred, so it's attention seeking. Everything was fine until another shopper at the deli counter wouldn't get off her phone. He does that because of puberty and hormones. She has her period, so she's like, we have any number of these potentially faulty explanations that may or may not be true, but we automatically accept them because they make sense to us as opposed to actually being database decisions. So cognitive bias also comes into play here, which is that we may see the world a certain way, so therefore we interpret things in a certain way. As hard as we may try at not doing that, we all fall into that habit. Got that? Good. Okay. The number one rule for community-based instruction is don't be stupid. Like, know the limits of your ability, know your students' interests. Like, start small and then build up. Like I mentioned before, I may want to say, well, you know what? He actually is better in the morning than he is at night. And this one staff, they have a better relationship. So we're going to start going out in the morning with this staff to his favorite place. And it's only going to be a 15-minute trip, but we're going to build upon our positive outcomes to then go into more difficult and challenging situations. Always have a plan about what you're going to do. If X happens, what are you going to do? One of my most behaviorally challenged individuals, he actually now goes into a 7-Eleven, the van pulls up, he gets out after he works, and he goes in independently and buys something, usually buys a Gatorade. This was before he got to that step, but the staff was in there with him, but not physically with him, just in the store. And he was waiting in the checkout line, and he was getting agitated waiting in the checkout line. And the staff person made, which I think was the right decision, to sort of cut their losses, because 7-Elevens are kind of small, they're crowded. This individual has the potential to actually cause some pretty good damage. So, she said, listen, why don't we go chill out in the van? It wasn't like, no, this, no, it was like, let's go chill out in the van. So he went out in the van, they just sat down. She had him put his stuff on the counter so that he didn't even put it back, he just put it on the counter, and they walked out. They were in the van for a couple minutes just chilling, literally just cooling out. When the customer behind him in line came out to the van with the stuff that he put on the counter because he bought it for him. Which is, again, that idea of if you become part of the community, people understand you. So nobody was upset that this happened. Nobody was they felt bad and they wanted to help him. Now, we were going to come in and get it anyway, but that's the kind of thing that really does happen. Avoid the busiest times of places. Like I said, we never go to McDonald's at noon. That's just a suicide mission to go to McDonald's at noon. So we avoid that. And like I said, it's attributed to Einstein, but I don't think it is. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If it doesn't work, change it. It's really that simple. I think the last thing I want to leave on this CBI report is don't let fear shape your behavior. It's really easy. And I emphasize with my staff all the time, they're like, well, we have to go out with 2 people with him. I'm like, great, that's no, but he goes out all day Saturday with his father. And is his father more talented than we are? Does his father have more skills than we do? Is his father more, what are the, because it's easy to get into this habit of avoidance. Avoidance is safe. Avoidance is easy. It is not what we do, however. That is not our charge if we're supposed to be changing people's life. So please do not let fear guide your behavior. Okay, this is the very fast. So bringing this all together. This is the 5-year plan, individualized choice. We, for individuals over the age of 12, do 5-year plans. For individuals under 12 and older than 5, we do 3-year plans. Why? Because we want to know what your vision, parents' vision, is for your son or daughter down the road. How else am I supposed to program if I don't know where we're going with this? And also, because you saw my critical 8, my critical 10, a lot of parents of younger kids really are into academic skills, and I get that. But I also want them to be into this. So I could say, okay, he's 5. At 8 years old, do you still want to be showering him or bathing him? At 8 years old, do you still want to be wiping his butt after about if not, we need to include this into this so we can start building towards this goal down the road. Because otherwise it's hard to realize why we think it's so important. With younger kids, like I said, it's only a 3-year plan because rate of scale acquisition are greater. So we would change things faster. But starting at 12, we sit down with families and say, okay, he's 12, at 17, what's he doing? You tell me. It's not I'm the hired gun. You tell me where he's going to be, and I'm going to try and help you get there. That is my job. Starts with who's at the meeting. We look at these areas with the 3-year plans. We don't do career, but it's career, home, leisure, public life, and private life. Public life is like being a member of your social community. Private life is that you're part of your family. You have a couple people in your life that like you and that you can do things with. That's what that really means. We use our definition of critical skills, which we saw before. But then, like I said, we ask, how do you define independence? So is it able to follow an activity schedule that's developed by a parent or staff? That might be it, or is it able to follow an activity schedule that he or she developed? Is it that they do their own laundry when directed to do so? Or is it that they do their own laundry on laundry day when the laundry basket is full? Is it that they shop for 10 groceries with parent or staff following just in case, or are the staff waiting outside? So we want a definition to what is independence, because that's at the core of what we're trying to achieve. But then we develop this. We say 5 years from now, what's he doing? How's this for a goal statement? In 5 years' time, Spencer will be 20 years old and will be ready as if he's transitioning to live on his own. This includes independent self-waking, showering, dressing, toileting, toothbrushing, laundry, cooking, and other general life skills. He will independently follow scheduled activities for up to 8 consecutive hours. Spencer will demonstrate personal responsibility related to maintaining his room neatly, purchasing correct size clothes, keeping inventory for food shopping, etc. In terms of community, Spencer will be able to shop for himself, including meals and other necessities and preferences. He'll be able to independently navigate increasingly greater distances in the community to participate in community living, that he could walk down the street and go to a little deli. That was part of the goal there. Spencer will be able to distinguish good versus bad touch and discriminate different relationship roles, mom versus friend versus staff versus acquaintance versus stranger. He'll be able to use a smartphone to make or receive calls and texts, contact someone for help, describe his location to another person, or use send location function, and when appropriate, maybe even kill some time playing a game. Spencer will be interning in a job requiring attention to detail, maybe assembling motherboards if that's even a job anymore. He will be able to work for 90 minutes independently and check his completed work for accuracy. He will respond to directions from his supervisors and socially interact to whatever degree appropriate with his coworkers. He'll make lunch for work and purchase lunch at work as appropriate. Spencer will be able to initiate independent choices with regard to leisure activities, which may include team bowling, going to arcade, playing mini golf, or hanging at the mall. That's big, right? But isn't that the outcome we want? And typically in ABA, we would try and break that down into 12 or 20 little isolated goals, as opposed to thinking about what is the big goal here. And that is what we need to do today, is ask, what is the big goal here, and how do we do this? So now we take this, and this is arguably a best guess. Nobody knows what 5 years from now is going to look like, but we need to set a goal so we know where we're going with this. But then we start to break it down. We say, okay, so career, if he's going to work at this place for 90 minutes and make maybe motherboards or something, so he needs the ability to work productively for 90 minutes with production rate commensurate to other employees on an assembly task requiring significant attention to detail, for example, assembling motherboards. Two of the challenges we see is he can follow an activity schedule, but the extent to which he's fully engaged during this time is not documented. So he may follow an activity schedule for 2 hours, but we don't know if he's really engaged the whole time. We need to locate training tasks that have that level of detail to actually start working on some of this stuff. And then we have recommendations. So assess actual duration of productivity during these activities. Coordinate with the transition coordinator to locate required tasks, provide intensive intervention by a certain date. Provide Spencer with tasks that involve both seated work and tasks that will have him moving around, because we want to assess, is he better sitting down? Is he better moving around? This sort of stuff. And so it goes on and on. We do the same for home. Spencer will be independently wake himself up. It's a new skill, so it needs to be assessed, but he does respond to timers, so he knows the idea. So we're just generalizing it to a new environment. Leisure, he'll participate in New Jersey Special Olympics. That was going to be an easy one. Like we're thinking of doing like an inter-ABA school bowling league. So there are other schools in our area that we would include like typical peers, siblings, and kids with autism, and do like a bowling league among them. If bowling is something he really likes, as opposed to just going with, our school. Community, he'll be able to purchase his own clothes by size and color. This is just one of my own little weird things, I have to be honest. Only because I think all of you here today are all dressed appropriately, but you're all dressed very differently. And it's an important thing for you to pick out your own clothes. But for most of my students, nobody ever thinks that way, because mom or dad buys the clothes. And none of my students up to this date knew their own clothing size, or ever had the opportunity. And I don't know if it's going to make a difference in their life. I really don't. But I will never know if I don't try. So I want to give it a try and see if this is something. And we already started with a couple kids who I think right now so far just find it amazingly goofy that we're actually doing this with them. That we're going to like Kohl's and they have to find the right size and they have to do this kind of stuff. But so we'll see where it all plays out. But then what's really important is we break it down to 3 areas of responsibility. Number 1 is family responsibility. What does the family have to do to help us achieve this goal? And when we write the first plan, we meet again in 6 months to review where we are. If we start this at 12, then at 14 or 15, we actually review the plan every 4 months. 15 to 16, every 3 months. 17, 18, 19, every 2 months. And then you get to 20, 21, it's every month. Because we really have to keep moving with this. Then there's our responsibility in doing this over the next 6 months. But then the last one is, what is the community's responsibilities? And this is kind of a weird one, but it does mean, in my career, the one thing I've found that I require the community to say yes to is employment training or employment. If I wanted to go ice skating, he can go ice skating. If I wanted to learn swimming, he can learn swimming. If I wanted to go to the grocery store, fine. Nobody can stop me. But to be employed, to work, I need somebody else to say yes. So that's why I said there's community responsibilities here. And then if necessary as part of this, we do something called resource mapping. If you're not familiar with resource mapping, if you go to Google Maps, you can put in your address, and then there's a function where you could put social organizations, and it'll tell you every Elks Club, Moose Club, Knights of like in like a 5-mile area. And we sometimes do that to look for possible financial resources. So they want to donate to it. But we say, swimming lessons. Well, where are all the pools? Where are the public pools with swimming lessons in our areas? Like, are there any mini golf courses in it? And this tells us, so we don't have to sort of do this person to person. It's a really cool feature. Maybe we can find some manufacturing. Maybe we could find a motherboard manufacturer within 5 miles or 10 miles. That's what that we could never find otherwise. So that's what it's for. But then, at the end of the day, what this all comes down to is quality of life. Right? That's what it's all about. Right? Everybody here wants to have a positive quality of life. It's not novel. It's not new. This is Forbes magazine from 3 years ago. The top 10 places to live for positive quality of life. Madison, Wisconsin. Put a bullet in my head. Lincoln, Nebraska. Put another bullet in my head. Minneapolis, Minnesota. St. Paul, Minnesota. I think that's cheating because they're the same city, just on different sides of the river. Omaha, Nebraska. Thank you, no. Buffalo, New York. Thank you, no. Lexington, Kentucky. Bourbon, maybe. I don't know. Lubbock, Texas. I don't think so. Fort Wayne, Indiana. Never mind. Fremont, California. Not really. I'm not a West Coast guy. But you know what? I live in Weehawken, New Jersey. And I have a pretty good life. I have a job that I love. I have 2 dogs that I think are really cool. I have a woman that I adore in my life. For me, it's not about where I live. It's about what I do where I live. And that's what quality of life comes down to. But that also illustrates just how complex it is. Now, would I love to live back in New York City again? Absolutely. But I have to hit the Mega Millions lottery to do it the way I want to. Because I want to live in a really nice place, and I want to be able to go to Broadway plays, and I want to be able to go to, I want to do all that stuff. On a salary of a person who runs an autism program, it's not going to happen. But I'm very happy in Weehawken. Despite the fact that my apartment building is actually built on a toxic waste dump, that's besides the point. The point is, quality of life is a really complex construct. Now, this definition, Waymire and Shalix from 2001, has become kind of the standard quality of life definition within the field of developmental disabilities. And they have quality of life as a term used to describe a temporal condition, so it's time-bound. It's at this point in your life, do you perceive your life as positive? Of personal satisfaction, it is how you feel. Not how anybody else feels, but how you feel. With such core life conditions as physical well-being, are you healthy? Emotional well-being, how is your mental health? Interpersonal relations, do you have friends in your life? Social inclusion, are you part of a big social group? Personal growth, are you challenged on a regular basis to acquire more complex skills? Material well-being, do you have enough money to take care of yourself and to access the things you want? Self-determination, do you get to make your own decisions? And individual rights. How are all you faring on all of those? That's tough, right? But I think these are good targets. I don't know how they play out for very different people, but I think that these are sort of important components. And I have a lot of high verbal friends, and we talk about this stuff. And like one of my friends in talking about, Donna again, talking about the interpersonal relations, like I think I said before, she said, all you need in your life is one good typical friend. You don't need more than one. Two of you are too confusing. Like one is enough. All her other friends are on the spectrum, which makes sense to me. Like that's perfect. Another friend of mine, he's on the spectrum. He's a mechanical engineer who worked for a firm in New York City, did all their individual projects, wasn't a real good team player, go figure, but worked for them for many years, and eventually he was let go, not because anything did, it was just they were downsizing, and you know, they weren't taking in a whole lot of like individual projects, so it made sense. But when he and I were talking about like money, like going forward, like you're not working, do you have money? He pointed out that like he lives in a rent-controlled apartment in New York City. He buys all his clothes at the Salvation Army because he likes that broken-in feeling. Like he never wanted a Rolex watch or a big screen TV. Like there's only about 8 foods that he really likes to eat, so it's not like he's going out to expensive dinner. Like he has like $80,000 in a savings account. He has 2 retirement accounts. He has CD. He has like more money than I will ever know. So I borrowed like $5,000, and then we sort of went on with her. No, I didn't. No. But because money was never why he worked. You know, it wasn't part of his, but so he's set financially. He's okay. That's not going to be a concern. So it depends on the individual. But you know, in ASD, we really don't talk much about quality of life. We give it some lip service, but it's only been like in the past decade or so that we've really started to look at it as an important outcome variable. I'm not too shocked by this because the field of intervention and support in ASD is still young. 1968, first articles in JABA. We didn't have an autism diagnosis really to DSM-3, which was in the 80s. IDEA, Educational Handicapped Children Act, was 74. That became IDEA, I think, in 78. So we haven't been doing this for a long time. The community of people with intellectual disabilities has been doing this for a long time. You know, I think ARCs are great resources if you work with adults. Because if you go to your local ARC, like they have programs on issues with the criminal justice system. They have sexuality programs. They have substance abuse programs that are ARCs that the autism community is just now starting to see as a potential problem. So we are new to this. A lot of the research that has been done has focused on sort of quantitative aspects of very few domains. Like, is the person employed or not? And if they are employed, then they rated them as having a higher quality of life, but they never asked, do you like your job? Which really is sort of the defining characteristic. A relatively recent meta-analysis, Van Heist and Gertz, they identified a total of 10 peer-reviewed studies on quality of life published in 2004 and 2012. The results indicated that quality of life is significantly lower for people with autism when compared to their typical peers. Age, IQ, well, that didn't seem to have that big of a challenge on it, okay? Across the lifespan, people with autism experience a much lower quality of life compared to people without autism. But, and this is a big but, in a study done by Parsons, and this is not a good study in many ways, from a technical point of view. It's an internet-based survey. There's selection bias in responding, so it's sometimes a little bit hard to understand what the results really say. But all the research before this asked parents or caregivers about the quality of life of their sons or daughters or the people with whom they work. So it's third-party reports. Parsons asked adults on the spectrum who were verbal. And the adults on the spectrum responded, said, there were challenges, and it wasn't really all that easy, but that their life was not as bad as other people make it out to be. That it was a more positive outcome than might otherwise be expected. So the question that he posed, which has yet to be answered, but I think is valid, is when we talk about quality of life, are we holding people to a very neurotypical standard of quality of life, as opposed to the quality of life that is really yours as a person on the autism spectrum? And if so, how do we help people to achieve that particular sense of quality of life, particularly those who are low verbal and can't tell us what they want or don't want? And I think I had mentioned before, like, having a third party judge your quality of life is not the most effective way. When I graduated Rutgers, my mother thought my quality of life was horrible. Like, I thought it was freaking awesome. But she wasn't living my life. Only I got to judge it. So third-party reports can be a little bit challenging. So I'm looking forward to more research in this area and better done research. What I mean by there's a selection bias is that people who wanted to respond because they had a point of view to make tend to respond to these sort of studies. So that's what I mean by selection bias. So it may not be a true, adequate representation of what's out there. But let me do a couple of closing thoughts then. Despite our best efforts, these 3 hours were still only a brief overview of the issues related to ABA and adults with ASD. We really didn't even touch on such topics as sexuality. That's a huge area to begin with. Working with parents of older individuals, behavior analysis and mental health. In many ways, behavior analysis and behavior analysts have abandoned the field of mental health. That we say, oh, that's depression, there's nothing we can do. There's behavioral literature in depression. Oh, that's obsessive, oh, it's nothing we can, there's behavioral literature in OCD, but we sort of understand. We invented systematic desensitization and treatments for anxiety disorders. We invented it, but we stay away from it. So there's a lot we can do. Healthcare transition, which I talked about. Aging and ASD. We know very little about that. We know something, but not a whole lot about employment, transportation, quality of life, leisure, so on. There's so much that we haven't talked about that this could be an entire 2-semester college course talking about adults with autism and what their real needs are. But moving forward, here's what I know about the future. It happens as a result of what we do today. What we're doing now doesn't work. It really is that simple. If you look at our outcomes, now there are outliers and there are real positive outcomes that can be found, and there are pockets of excellence across the country of people doing some really good work. They also just, tend to keep it pretty quiet. The reason being is because they don't want families moving in from out of their district to come in and be part of that, because now their numbers go from 30 students to 90 students, and all of a sudden it's much more difficult to do it for 90 students than it was for 30 students. So they're trying to avoid that. Good, better, and different, that's sort of the rationale. But we need to do better. And we also need to do different, because what we're doing isn't working. Please read this article. This is Diane Bannerman from 1990. Balancing the right to habilitation with the right to personal liberties, the rights of people with developmental disabilities to eat too many donuts and take a nap. This had a significant impact on my professional development, this article, when it came out. I continue to refer back to it across the years. But the fact of the matter is, adults have the option to make choices in their lives, and some of them are not always going to be good. Okay? If you look at the research on casual sex and college students, something like over 60% of college students by the time they graduate have had at least one episode of casual sex, whether it was a friend with benefits thing, or they slept with, it was a one-night pickup, or a hookup. I think that's because I'm so freaking old. 60%. So does that mean that we should say, well, 60% of adults with autism spectrum disorders should sleep with a stranger at least once in their life? Why not? Typical peers are. Wouldn't that be normative behavior then? Like, what does this mean if we're talking about what's appropriate and what's normative, and how do we actually get there or not get there, and how do we make these sort of decisions? But people do have their own rights. And how do we actually help them achieve their goals in doing this? A friend of mine, a colleague, not really a friend. I mean, we're friendly, but we're just not. He said, the problem with the disability system in the United States is that we don't let people with autism dance drunk on the table in Cabo San Lucas at 3 o'clock in the morning. And why that's a problem is that's the best story that all their caretakers have. And that's a problem. I don't know if that's a solution, but that is a problem. So please read this article. I do, again, want to emphasize that it is a 3-term contingency applied behavior analysis, and we've become enamored with just the behavior analysis part. We think that that's sort of, our clinical competence is really sort of what we focus on. But it's the applied part that sets us apart from experimental analysis of behavior. Pat Fryman, if you know Pat Fryman's work, is out of Boys Town in Nebraska. If you ever get a chance to see Pat speak, go see Pat speak. He is awesome, and I don't use that word lightly. He's one of my heroes. He talks about one of the simplest things he did that was most rewarding. Back when they first banned smoking in public buildings, that they did a little study at the University of Nebraska campus about how far from the buildings they had to put the ashtrays so that smokers used them and non-smokers weren't bothered by them. And he said it wasn't publishable data, but it was all applied behavior analysis. Because if you put it too far, smokers just flick their cigarette over towards them. If you put it too close, non-smokers are really bothered by all the cigarette. So they did it, and that's all behavior analysis. All of this is actually within our ability. Do you know there's studies in a couple, I really hope looking for replications, where an intervention for a young woman with lupus involved a specific medication that was also toxic, not all that uncommon, but what they did was that they paired the administration of the medication with music and the smell of rose petals. And also cod liver oil. It was cod liver oil. So the taste of cod liver oil, music, and rose petals. And they kept up the administration of this medicine, and then at one point they cut the medicine by half, and the body continued to respond as if they were getting the full dose of the medicine, as long as the cod liver oil, music, and rose petals were there. That's behavior analysis. That's the kind of stuff that we can do. Maybe not on that level, but we can do. If you hit a wall, I usually go back to the 7 dimensions, but I also keep coming back to this. Is there Cooper, Heron, and Eward's 3 ethical questions? When approached with a questionable situation or ethical concerns, behavior analysts should rely on these 3 questions. What is the right thing to do? The right thing to do as a behavior analyst, as an educator, as a speech and language professional, and the right thing to do for my student, for my client, for the person that I'm supposed to serve. What is the right thing to do? Not the easiest thing, not necessarily the thing that's written in the protocol, but what is the right thing to do? What's worth doing? I think the one variable we will never have enough of. We have really cool people on the spectrum that we work with. We have dedicated, concerned, trained, educated staff who come to conferences like this because they want to learn more and they want to be able to do better things. We have parents who love their kids and will go to the ends of the earth to help their kids. School-wise, we have IDEA. We have this law that actually gives us money to sort of do this stuff. But we don't have time. And we will never, ever, ever have enough time. And the biggest sin I think we commit in our field is that we waste students' times. We waste our time teaching stuff that doesn't work. We teach it in the wrong way. That's our problem. So what's worth doing? And then lastly, what does it mean to be a good BCBA? Now, this is a question that forms the core of our professional ethics, and that gets a little more complicated. But a good BCBA understands the 7 dimensions and looks at producing socially significant outcomes in a way that generalizes and maintains across environments. It's pretty simple. Billy has 32 pieces of bacon. He eats 28. What does he have now? Happiness. Billy has happiness. Ask parents of any typical kid in the world, what do you want for your son or daughter when they grow up? What do they say? I want them to be happy. Has anybody here ever written an IEP goal or an adult service goal with happiness as an outcome variable? Denny Reed has published 7 studies with happiness as an outcome variable, behavior analytic literature in JABA, Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. There are other studies out there looking at different aspects. This is within our ability. And by happiness, I don't mean like that he or she like sits in the corner masturbating, eating Cheetos, watching Barney. Like that's not like what I'm talking about. Like I'm talking about that they have opportunities in life, that they have choices, that there are things that they like to do and things that they have to do. And there's some really relevant mix of things like that, that they're respected by the people that they work with, that they have opportunities, that they're valued in their relationship. That's what I mean about happiness, okay? We can do this. Don't dream it, be it. Just so you know, when I presented in Texas recently, they made me take this slide out. I guess they're not Tim Curry fans. That's the only conclusion I could come to. But it's not going to happen without us. And when I had my goals, 20 hours a week employment, like being part of a soul, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I can sit here and talk about that this is the thing we have to do, but I got to take the step and do it. And if there's any difference at this point in my career between myself and some of my colleagues, is that I've become much more comfortable with failure. I'm much more willing to try something because we need to teach this skill, and if it fails, I just have learned to change really quickly. Because I'm not going to get it right every single time. Okay? I have to be willing to try stuff that I'm not sure is going to work and then take a step. But we have a protocol that we work on teaching body sensations. So I may take an ice pack and put it on a student's shoulder and say, what did you feel? They're supposed to say cold. Where did you feel it? Shoulder, right? The original permutation also involved who did it? And the idea was that maybe we could teach reporting if there was any sexual abuse or any other kind of abuse and where the abuse occurred. We tried that. We had some moderate success. We were able to teach the response to that so that individuals could respond about an hour later fairly accurately. But after an hour, it just dropped out of their repertoire. So why? Well, we had good graphs, and it probably we could have it was meaningless in terms of its actual, unless we were able to get them to respond and report within an hour of the incident. But you know what we found is that if we just do the body sensation thing, we have a portion of kids who actually then go on to tell us where it hurts when they're not feeling well. So that's now how we use it. But we wouldn't have learned that if we hadn't tried the other thing before. So teach your students to wipe after a bowel movement. Teach early, teach often, get it done with. Richard Thaler, father of behavioral economics. If you don't know behavioral economics, you should check out some of his books. Very accessible, really, really interesting. 2 years ago, I think, or last year, got the Nobel Prize in economics for behavioral economics, which is a permutation of behavior analysis in many ways. Economics has an idealized responder. Behavioral economics has real people as their responders. That's kind of the big difference. But so we have precedent now for some relationship to behavior analysis winning a Nobel Prize. So if you want the next Nobel Prize, come up with a way to teach kids to effectively and consistently wipe their butts after bowel movements. You will get the Nobel, I guarantee it. You will get it. A failure is not always a mistake. It may simply be the best one can do in those circumstances. The real mistake is to stop trying. My job description, your job description, I don't care what your role is change somebody's life for the better. The challenge we face is that there's never an ending. That is the most beautiful thing about my job, and the most frustrating thing is I'm never done. One of my friends on the spectrum, very high verbal guy, 3 years ago got engaged. And his father called me up and said, I know you're going out with my son, made up name John, next week. Could you do me a favor and just talk to him about the engagement? I just want to make sure that he knows what he's doing and it's the right thing. And I said, I'm happy to do that, but just so you know, I've been divorced twice, so I'm probably not your best person to do this. But I'm happy to talk to him about it. And I said, oh, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we're at lunch, and we're talking about his fiance, and I said, do you have a picture? Pretty normal question, right? He said, oh, yeah, of course. Takes out his phone, pulls up a picture. Pretty normal response, right? Hands me the phone. It's a naked selfie of this woman. I take the phone. This is literally my response. I go, why did you give me this? He said, because you asked for a picture. I said, why'd you give me that picture? It's the only one I have. How do you think she would feel if she knew you showed that to me? She knows about you. She'd be okay. And I'm thinking, when does it stop? Like, when do I get to say, you know everything you're supposed to know? Because the rules keep changing. 10 years ago, I never would have had to teach about a naked selfie. Now I guess I have to start teaching about a naked selfie because things keep changing all the time. So I said, do not tell her you showed me this. Whatever you do not tell her. You know, unfortunately, and I'm very sad, like they did break up. It was not, and no outside influences, they just decided it wasn't for them. But he's a really great guy. Like he's gonna be really great for someone someday. But I just felt bad for him. But again, I'm like, when do I get to stop teaching? So, but a failure is not a mistake. It may simply be the best one can do in the circumstances. The real mistake is to stop trying. And save the world with behavior analysis. Thank you all very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gerhardt. Just remember that anyone seeking social work CEUs must sign in and out at the registration desk. Please complete an evaluation for this session through the Grouperio app. The session is number 94, and the speaker was Dr. Peter Gerhardt. And the code. Also, don't forget, we have a keynote closing with Dr. Gerhardt as well in Presidents. The code for this session is RET801. RET801. Thank you, everyone.